Test Tower. The fire was burning in the hall. The swords were stuck into the floor. The number of attempts was reported to be 79, and the number of deaths was 315,850. This was all the result that humanity achieved. It was reported that the destruction of humanity would occur in 58 minutes and 33 seconds. In the office of the guy who saw this message, he scattered all the documents and hit the table with his hands. The destruction of humanity was reported to be in 58 minutes and 32 seconds. People on the street were very excited when they saw the message about their destruction. The destruction of humanity was reported to be in 58 minutes and 31 seconds. People looked at their phones in horror as they received a shocking notification. Test Tower, 48th floor. The whole hall was on fire. Dead players lay on the floor. There were messages in the chat from Raccoon Man, who wrote that everyone did their best. His message was answered by Claymore123, who wrote, "Just a second." A man, enveloped in a strong blue aura, landed on the burning floor in a hall shrouded in flames. It was reported that a challenger had set foot on the territory of the 48th floor of the Red Dragon Destia. A player under the nickname Claymore wrote that there are still people ready to challenge. In the burning hall stood a guy whose face was covered by system censorship. In his hands was a small blade. In the chat, a player with the nickname Current Writer Josian wrote that this is a challenger in a very bad situation. At the same second, the number of viewers who connected became more and more, breaking the mark of 7,500 players. A huge monster, with a bunch of sharp teeth in its mouth, growled loudly. It was a dragon. He was so huge that the challenger was just a fly in comparison. Fire burned in the dragon's eyes. Bowing his head to the newcomer, the dragon said that people do not know how to give up at all, after which he asked if, having lost such a huge number of their fellow tribesmen, they had really returned again. The challenger immediately said that there was still a lot to be done to prepare the fried lizard, adding that he was still on time. Raising his head proudly, the dragon angrily asked if the newcomer knew that even with such a death the process could be made much more painful. He raised one of his front paws, which began to accumulate enormous magical power. "But what's the point of talking to you?" the dragon suddenly said. At the same second, chains began to envelop the challenger's legs. Below him was a huge magic circle. His legs were quickly wrapped in chains, preventing him from moving. "Your ending will be insignificant," the dragon added. After these words, he directed a strong blow with his paw at the last opponent, who, although he could not move, stood up. A second later, the dragon's paw crushed the challenger, breaking everything within a radius of several meters. Suddenly, a voice was heard asking if driving into a corner and immediately attacking was not an obvious pattern. Hearing this, the dragon looked in the direction of the voice in shock. Not far from the point of impact stood the unharmed challenger, saying that just by looking at the movements, it becomes clear what the dragon is going to do. The dragon became enraged and fire poured out of its mouth. He asked himself if his opponent had really dispelled the effect of his skill in an instant. "Not bad, man," the dragon said angrily, after which he added that, however, after that, he majestically raised his head, preparing to spew out flames, and concluded that the challenger had simply chosen the path to a more painful death. After these words, he released a huge stream of fire at the challenger. By moving its head, the dragon controlled a stream of flame across the entire battlefield. The unharmed challenger suddenly rose above the fire. Deftly turning over in the air, he rushed towards his opponent. Suddenly, a huge and ominous force enveloped the blade in his hand. Within a second, he delivered an incredibly powerful blow to the dragon's face. Jumping into the distance, he looked at the dragon, who bowed his head and cursed. The challenger hit the monster right in the eye, from which the player's powerful magic subsequently oozed out. The dragon was angrier and stronger than before. He threw up his head, spread his wings, and shouted that he would never leave the challenger alive. A system window appeared indicating that the Red Dragon Destia was taking advantage of the features of the breast region. The voice of the challenger was heard, saying that this entire dungeon is located under the lands of Bress, however. He raised his left hand, which was enveloped in strong magic. "There are no reasons for evasion," he added. The aura enveloping the player's hand became increasingly stronger, and particles of the system appeared around it. The message window said that the memories of the world were being read. Suddenly, behind the challenger, the holographic construction of a huge building began. The player extended his hand in front of him. An alert appeared indicating that a limitless stock of recorded skills was being formed. "Hellfire," said the challenger, after which a sphere of flame appeared in his outstretched hand. Raising the blade, he told it to burst into flames with black tears. After these words, the blade of his weapon burst into black flame. "Fool," the dragon said in a terrifying voice, looking at the player. Strong fire magic enveloped him. The dragon asked the player if he really believed in the power of some skills and was now shouting at the top of his lungs, after which he added that he would never kill his kind. Raising the burning blade to his face, the challenger calmly said that at this level it was truly impossible, after which he said that this is why he would create it himself. "Hellfire and black tears," the player said, waving his blade, when suddenly he shouted, ordering the two skills to unite. At that same second, the hellish flames began to mix with the dark flames. A notification immediately appeared, informing him that the S-level Hellfire skill and the S-level Black Tears skill had been combined. Both flames mixed, forming something new. In his head, the challenger said that this would be a skill higher by a whole rank. Then he added that even a dragon is not able to resist him. The notification window said that the merger was successful. The main character raised his hand, which a few minutes ago contained hellish flames. Instead of his previous skill, there was a huge cloud of magic above him, shrouded in a terrifying aura. The notification that appeared said that the breath of Etherian, an SSS-rank void dragon, had been received. The dragon looked in horror at what the challenger had done. He asked in horror if this was really the strongest breath that Etherian himself, one of the ancients, used. In his mind he imagined a huge dragon whose eyes were closed. Etherian was shrouded in a strong, terrifying and overwhelming aura. Destia shouted, asking how any person could repeat this skill. Jinhyuk, the challenger, introduced himself, throwing off his mask. There was a malicious smile on his face. He said that through trial and error you eventually become smarter. There is fire in his eyes. Jinhyuk looked at his opponent and said that this is not the first time he has killed a dragon. "Old man," he suddenly called his enemy. Flop, the voice of an unknown person was heard. On the monitor screen there was a game of the MMORPG genre. Again a voice was heard saying that it is often used to mean uninteresting or unbalanced, adding that these are games with terrible controls. The guy was sitting at the table, and his face and body were illuminated by the light from the game. He heavily criticized the game, calling it very bad. Or if the game has an absurd level of difficulty, he continued his thoughts. A huge tower was in front of one of the heroes. The guy kept thinking that this virtual reality game Tower of Challenges exactly matched this description. After adding that after the launch of the game, Korean old men, each of whom considered it their hobby to outplay its creators, rushed to conquer this game. He introduced players of different classes who rushed to attack. The guy added that old people will refuse to eat and sleep throughout the year. However, after 3 years, people realized, he added, after some thought. Presenting various bosses and mobs, deadly traps and slugs that destroyed players with ease, he said that Tower of Challenges is a game that impossible to pass. He remembered the huge and great Gate Guardian, who deserves to be called invincible. Afterwards, he remembered the many heroes frozen to death who arrived in the polar region with a temperature of -60 degrees, where it is possible to freeze to death in just an hour. The next thing he remembered was a huge labyrinth, more than 10,000 kilometers long. This was not entertainment, but real torture, he said suddenly. After that, he forcefully threw the virtual reality glasses to the floor. After that, the game went bankrupt, the guy said. Or rather, it almost went bankrupt, he added, remembering the destroyed wall. Everything in the hall he remembered was destroyed. There was blood and shrapnel everywhere. He continued to say that there were still a small number of old people who defied this damn difficulty. Jinhyuk was breathing heavily, huge drops of sweat running down his face. He stood at the very top of the tower. He received notifications that the 50th floor had been captured. After that, another notification appeared congratulating him that Jinhyuk was the first to clear the challenge tower. Is this really true? The main character asked himself exhaustedly, holding his hand, from which blood was flowing. He kept saying that he was just curious. He explained that, unlike others, he cleared the tower in a different way. Jinhyuk said that he repeated the same thing over and over again until he learned everything by heart and became confident that he could reach the goal. He recalled many moments of his passage through the various floors. Suddenly, he added that he spent all 11 years on this. As Jinhyuk left the tower, he looked back and said that he didn't expect to clear everything down to the last floor, and then said that he should have at least turned on the live broadcast. Opening the system screen in front of him, he asked himself whether it was worth posting it on Newdub, after which he said that even though it was a flop, the video would still get a certain number of views. Suddenly, a notice in the form of an envelope appeared next to his head. Opening it, it contained a message thanking Jinhyuk for still playing their game. The next notification that appeared stated that there would be a reboot update in 12 hours. Reading this, Jinhyuk smiled contentedly, asking himself how much money the company uses to make updates. He sat down on the floor, leaning back against the broken wall behind him. Suddenly he laughed, saying that he couldn't understand because the game didn't bring much profit, after which he said that the guys were apparently up to something. The playing space began to collapse. He said that no matter what reboot update there was, he was no longer going to return to this game. After that, the main character took off his virtual glasses and said that he was going to broadcast the broadcast, which can be considered the source of his income, for the last time. He reported that he had no family to take care of, although he was already 27 years old, after which he said that with all this, he could not live forever on only 500,000 won a month. Jin-hyuk looked at his room, which was littered with bags of trash. There were energy drink cans on the table. "It is necessary to tell the captain that he will not be involved in sports for some time," he added. The main character went to the window and opened it. Afterwards, he looked up at the night sky, dotted with stars, and said that he had once been told that he should aim to become a professional fighter, but now money is definitely more important than sports. It was late at night outside. The moon was already at its peak. Jin-hyuk started a stream, and 20 people joined in 3 minutes. In the chat they asked why he started the stream too early. The main character laughed while reading the chat. His table was filled with various foods and sodas. People in the chat noticed this and laughed and joked. Suddenly the face of the main character changed. He became very tense. He immediately turned to his chat, saying that he wanted to tell them something. People in the chat began to be outraged. The main character gathered his strength before speaking about the end of his career. Suddenly, taking a mug of alcohol, he laughed and said that he was just catching up on the atmosphere. Having emptied his glass of drink, he said to himself that tomorrow he needed to officially announce that he was winding down this business. After some time, he drank 3 bottles of alcohol and began to fall asleep. Opening his eyes, the first thing he saw were those same empty bottles, which were illuminated by the rays of the sun. Jin-hyuk lay on the bed in a depressed state. Standing up, he grabbed his aching head and stomach, saying that he needed to quickly post a video about passing the test tower. By pressing the power button on the power supply, the main character turned on the computer. Suddenly, a certain shock appeared in his eyes. He saw a stream called Tower of Challenges actually appear. There were 331,417 people attending the broadcast. He looked at it confused. "I don't know what to say. Has the Tower of Tests really appeared?" he asked himself. After that, he clicked on the login button. Once on the broadcast, he saw that all the people on the street were looking at a huge tower that had appeared in the middle of the city. The camera suddenly turned to the guy who started this broadcast. He shouted that this tower was from the game Tower of Challenges, launched 11 years ago. Immediately the camera focused on the sky, which took on a blood-red color. "It can't be," the main character said to himself, who watched the broadcast in surprise, after which he said that this happens when you first start the Tower of Tests. At that very second, a notification appeared in front of him, which greatly frightened Jin-hyuk. It said that the first stage of updating the new version of the Challenge Tower had been completed. The city was engulfed in darkness and the sky was red. The new message stated that all players must move to the next floor of the tower within 90 days. Exactly the same message appeared in front of all people, no matter where they were. In case of failure, it was written on the next system window. Mothers and their children read in amazement what was written before them. Humanity appeared in the following notice. The chair in the main character's room fell with a crash. Shocked, Jin-hyuk looked at the system screen in front of him. A drop of cold sweat ran down his face. He was confused. "Will be destroyed," the last notice stated. It was again reported that the first phase of the update had been completed. The main character was no longer in the room, only an overturned chair remained. A notice appeared indicating that people's level of adaptability and acceptance of reality was increasing amazingly. "You need to remain calm," Jin-hyuk said, but he himself didn't really live up to his words. Drops of sweat were running down his face, and there was hidden fear in his eyes. As he left, he quickly put on his jacket. In his head, he said that if the Tower of Testing had actually become a reality, then now was not the time to hesitate. Opening the door, he ran out of the apartment like a bullet, saying to himself that he should hurry to the place where he could get this item. Running out onto the landing, he said that the world might be destroyed. Grabbing the handrail, he began to quickly descend, saying that nothing could be done. In one leap he jumped over all the steps, and there was a malicious smile on his face. Jin-hyuk said that his heart felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. Central City. There is panic on the streets. One of the guys was looking on the internet to find out what time and how quickly he could get to Busan. Another of the townspeople shouted that it was impossible to stay in Korea at all. The guy in the yellow jacket, pointing with his hand, said that you can only survive abroad. Immediately the girl, showing everyone her phone, said that there was no point in going because these towers are everywhere. The main character rushed past all the townspeople. He ran to the subway descent. Stopping, he looked down, thinking to himself that now is not the time to run, but the time to move forward. He began to hastily go down the stairs with the thought that in the north of Korea this place was chosen as one of the territories outside the tower, adding that if you look at the countries, there are only 40 of them, and this place is the closest of all. At the top of the sign it said Central Underground. Below there was a beautiful fountain with statues of angels. Once below, a notification appeared in front of the main character, informing him that he had entered the event area. Jin-hyuk was serious. Looking at all the people below, he said that they were all people who played the first part of the Tower of Trials. He walked calmly between all the people who cast quick glances at him. In his head he said that everyone was just watching each other and there was nothing else left to do. Then he realized that the number of items that would soon appear here was limited, and, if he was lucky, there would be about 5 of them. Suddenly the guy behind called out to the main character. Jin-hyuk turned around in surprise. The guy had a wide smile on his face. Recognizing Jin-hyuk, he said that it was a miracle that he really came, because the main character spent all day playing with toys, hiding in the corner of the room. It was Jongsu, BJ partner of Paprika TV and owner of 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, a so-called successful celebrity, and at the same time, a representative of the company of which the main character was a part. Looking at him, Jin-hyuk displeasedly asked if now is not the time for a live broadcast. Pointing to everyone gathered behind him, Jongsu asked if he could see what was happening there. What other broadcast? Having slightly pushed the main character, Jongsu, with a smile on his face, asked what floor he had risen to and why hide this from a colleague with whom he works in the same company. Colleagues, the main character asked himself displeasedly in his head without answering anything to the guy who approached him. Remembering how they did live broadcasts, Jin-hyuk said that in the company created by Jongsu, many BJs were deceived due to an unfair contract, and the more broadcasts BJs did, the deeper they sank into this quagmire, and their protesting voices were mercilessly drowned out by the force of enormous lawlessness. The main character added after a short pause. He remembered one of the BJs crying while doing a live broadcast. He looked at the webcam in the corner of the monitor, when he suddenly grabbed her. Having pulled it out, the guy threw it at the contract. Then Jin-hyuk said that as a result, the colleagues with whom he was so close, all the friends with whom he rose from the very bottom, gradually left the company. Interrupting the main character, Jongsu grabbed him by the shoulder and said that he knew that he was a good player and made delicious mukbang. Jongsu had a kind smile on his face. He said that especially for Jin-hyuk, he was ready to change the terms of the contract to more favorable ones. Jongsu, the main character, coldly addressed his interlocutor. The world has changed. After that, he hit the guy hard in the nose, from which blood immediately sprayed out. Jin-hyuk shouted at him not to throw around words. At that same second, 2 of Jongsu's teeth fell to the floor. He covered his face with his hand, from which blood flowed non-stop. Jongsu fell to the floor, and the main character, looking down at him, said to himself that he even felt better in his soul. Turning away and walking away, he said that gradually he should begin to appear. Particles of magic were flying around the fountain. Suddenly something began to bubble in the water of the fountain. Elsewhere in the fountain, the water also became agitated. At that same second, a huge stream of power burst out of the water. It was a huge tree. Its foliage was lush and green. A strong warm aura emanated from him. As soon as the players saw this, they looked at the mangrove tree in shock. Jin-hyuk smiled contentedly and said that everything was the same as in the Tower of Tests, after which he said that his memory was all right. The message that appeared was that the mangrove of greed continued to grow. Suddenly people saw red fruits appearing on the tree. Seeing them, the main character said, "These deliciously ripening fruits." The fruits were in drops of water, and under the warm aura that barely illuminated them, they seemed magical. Jin-hyuk added that they have an effect that increases the stats of agility, strength, and mana. Suddenly it dawned on him. His view changed. In his head he said that this was all without a doubt very good, but there were only 4 fruits. People around looked at each other. Quite harshly, said the main character. All those present at that very second climbed the tree for 4 fruits. They pushed, fought, kicked, just to get to the fruit. Suddenly a bloody handkerchief fell to the floor. It was Jongsu's handkerchief, who was covered in blood, and said, turning to Jin-hyuk, that if they unite, they will divide the fruit in half and it will be a victory for both. Suddenly he shouted that otherwise the main character would miss the fruit, adding that he was already late. Jin-hyuk looked at Jongsu coldly and did not answer. Turning away, he told him to sit quietly if he didn't know anything. "It's not time yet," he said firmly and with confidence. After these words, the main character smiled widely. People were maliciously eager to get the fruits. Suddenly one of them grabbed the fruit. He tore it off and bit it off greedily. A system window appeared next to him, informing him that his agility had increased by 3. Overjoyed, he waved his arms, shouting that everything worked out. Then Jin-hyuk said to himself that ordinary people don't even know about the existence of a tree with fruits. He saw people climbing up the tree non-stop. The main character added that people who have played only a few times will completely concentrate their attention on eating the fruits. He saw how people, one by one, began to fall from the tree. There was no emotion on his face. He was cool and calm. "And the old people," said the main character, creating intrigue. After that, a malicious smile appeared on his face. Suddenly he continued, enjoying a more perverted and cruel spectacle. A few minutes later, the tree root rushed to attack like a whip. He hit the ground around him with enormous impact force. In horror, people looked at the tree, jumping away. Suddenly one of the guys said that if you eat all the fruits, the tree becomes very dangerous. All those gathered began to leave in horror, passing by the main character, who did not move from his place. He looked at the tree, biding his time. Jiangsu also turned around, preparing to run away. Noticing him, the main character asked if he was really going to give up. Of course, the guy without 2 teeth screamed in horror. Disappointed with the answer, Jinhak said that the real reward of the event can only be obtained when all the fruits are eaten. Jiangsu stopped, turning to the main character. He asked, "Is he really telling the truth?" Looking at his interlocutor, Jinhak asked why he stayed here if it wasn't true. A bead of sweat ran down Jiangsu's face. Looking at the main character incredulously, he said in his head that he thought why he didn't show any interest in people, after which he said, so that was the reason. When suddenly he smiled madly and said in his head that he could definitely smell the sweet smell. Putting his hands in his pocket and spitting to the side, Jiangsu asked what he was going to do. In the eyes of the main character there was only confidence. He did not doubt anything. Jinhyuk replied, "That you need to get inside." Pointing to the raging tree, he said that if they moved close to each other, they would become easy targets, so be sure to approach the tree from both sides. "Are you really suggesting that we should focus our attention?" Jiangsu asked, interested. "Exactly," the main character answered, putting his hands in his pockets. They both prepared to begin the plan. Suddenly Jinhyuk said, looking at his comrade, that if at least one of them begins to hesitate, then that will all end. Jiangsu immediately replied that the main character should not worry, because this was not his first day in this game either. After a few seconds they moved. "Now," Jinhyuk said, after which he immediately ran in one direction. Jiangsu did not stand aside and also began to run, but only in the other direction. They surrounded the tree from different sides. Suddenly it stretched out huge and long roots. Jinhyuk deftly dodged the first root. Looking towards his comrade, he wanted to know how Jiangsu was doing. Jiangsu stood still with a crazy smile on his face, asking the main character who would listen to him. Then he said, without ceasing to smile an ugly smile, for Jinhyuk to go and become bait himself. The main character at this time easily dodged every root aimed at him. "What a relief," he said to himself. Suddenly a satisfied smile appeared on Jinhyuk's face. "That your character has not changed," he added. A sharp and large tree root was approaching the main character at high speed. He immediately dodged it, almost falling under the attack. At that very second, he said in his head that to those who would become bait. The root that Jinhyuk dodged went towards Jiangsu. "It will be you, standing there," the rather protagonist shouted in his head. At that same second, a sharp root appeared in front of the face of the uncomprehending Jiangsu. He immediately wrapped his legs, immobilizing him. The roots instantly enveloped Jiangsu's entire body. At this time, the main character was getting closer to the tree, not paying attention to the caught one. "Save!" In horror and despair, Jiangsu shouted. "Why do I need this?" the stopped protagonist asked with a malicious smile on his face. Then he said that if he wanted, Jiangsu could report him through that wonderful lawyer. Jiangsu's face became increasingly engulfed by the roots. Tears flowed from his eyes. He shouted that he did not want to die like that. But before he could finish speaking, the roots of the tree squeezed him, turning him into a bloody mess. "Have a nice trip, trash," the main character said to himself as he approached the tree. He has very little left to reach his goal. The roots of the tree again headed towards the main character. "To the left, 22 degrees, Jinhyuk said. His eyes quickly ran around the entire battlefield. He watched all the roots attacking him. The roots were getting closer. Looking in the other direction, he said, "To the right, 35 degrees. In his head, he immediately said that it would be easy to evade. At that very second, the roots surrounded him. Suddenly they collapsed, but Jinhyuk was no longer between them. Having collapsed, they bounced off each other and hit the trunk itself in the very center, breaking it. The roots began to break apart the tree bark even more, and finally, the main character said, "The roots have made a passage to the heart of the tree." It was small, but it beat quickly and was filled with powerful energy. In his head, the main character said that a mangrove tree core appeared. After that, he smiled sarcastically and added that there really wasn't a single bit of error here from what he went through in the game, because he knows the exact trajectory. It's difficult to attack himself. Next to him, he saw a fragment of one of the roots. Immediately, Jinhyuk grabbed him. His eyes glowed bright scarlet. Rising, he looked at the tree and asked how about not boring each other and calmly parting with the tree heart. The tree was raging. The main character, looking at him, said that since this is an event mob, there is no experience from him. At most he can raise the honor level for a day. The tree once again raised its tentacles and roots to attack and defend itself. At that very second it directed them towards the main character. Immediately, a message appeared informing that the mangrove tree of greed was using the blood-sucking vine skill. "Even though I'm an old man, it will be difficult for me to dodge this," Jinhyuk said after seeing the monster's attack. The roots of the tree, shrouded in an ominous aura, flew towards the main character. Jinhyuk became very tense and prepared to defend himself. "However," he said. After that, he turned the blade over in his hand. With a deft blow he repelled the attack of one of the roots, but he passed so close that he scratched the protagonist's cheek. The reflected root hit the ground with enormous destructive force. The following roots, Jinhyuk also accurately reflected. In his head he said that he had the power to twist the trajectory and change it to his heart's content. Suddenly, several roots united into one large root and were preparing to rush towards the main character. At the same second, picking up great speed, the huge hero headed towards Jinhyuk. "There's no need to be scared or worried," the main character said right away. His right eye glowed with bright blue fire. He reflected all the roots aimed at him without taking damage. He skillfully redirected all the roots to another place. They fell elsewhere, breaking through the floor. Carefully and deftly, he moved closer and closer to the tree. There was only one scratch on his face, as well as a contented and wide smile. "After all, I've already been through this many times," he said suddenly. The main character, whose face was covered with black hair, waved his hand in the air. His face began to sweat and he thought he was almost there. Behind a tree with a green crown there was a bright light. A blue butterfly was visible. Many of these insects flew out of the leaves of the tree and rushed upward. Jinhyuk frowned when he realized that they were sleep butterflies. He pressed his hand to his face. While dodging the glowing insects, the main character thought that they release sleeping pollen as a defense mechanism, and the sleeping pollen is inhaled instantly, and if you don't know how to protect yourself, you can instantly fall under this influence. Jinhyuk waved the butterfly away with his hand and thought that the method of defense was very simple. He rushed towards a tall tree and thought that the butterfly would not be dangerous if he simply held his breath. Bright winged insects flew around the tree, inside of which there were red veins. Jinhyuk extended his hand forward and attacked the hollow tree. Then the branches shook. The main character clenched his teeth tightly, raising one hand. He slammed his palm down on the trunk. A shock wave passed through. The space was illuminated. Jinhyuk's black hair flew away from the wind. His face became sweaty and bright red sparkles appeared in his eyes. The roots of a tree rushed towards him from below. The burnt leaves smoldered. The system reported that Jinhyuk was the first to bring down the World Tree of Greed. This tree was cut into two halves. It became pale and dry. The main character opened his mouth. He then smiled and thought that he didn't expect that the grip pattern and timing study he had been repeating so diligently and tediously would come in handy like this. Jinhyuk was once again grateful for everything he had been doing all this time. The system reported that within 24 hours the level of honor would be recorded as an achievement of the main character. The system asked for the player's name. The main character frowned in confusion and thought that this was a system that required personal information to raise the level of honor. The word name was visible on the blue screen, and Jinhyuk came to the conclusion that he would remain anonymous. He looked to the side and thought that he was categorically against the dissemination of his personal information, because it would cause widespread interest if it was revealed that he was an old man. The dark screen said that the face would be hidden by a mosaic and the voice would be altered, and Jinhyuk concluded that the system could not achieve complete anonymity, but it still made a compromise and hid his identity. The main character extended his hand to the tree and said that this is important now. He stuck his hand inside the trunk, trying to find something there. Suddenly a satisfied smile appeared on his face. There was a small jade ball in Jinhyuk's palm. He clenched his hand into a fist, grinning contentedly, and the system reported receiving the core of a tree heart. The main character imagined a red fruit with green leaves and thought that if every year the tree fruit raised strength, agility, and mana by 3 points, then the tree heart would provide at least 12 bonus stats. Jinhyuk imagined a glowing green ball and concluded that with the core it would rise by 4 points if you counted 3 as being given for gaining 1 level. The main character brought the core closer to his face, looking at it carefully, and thought that he did not even believe his eyes, because there could not be an item with such a good profitability and, moreover, even after 50 floors, nothing better could be found. Jinhyuk popped the jade ball into his mouth. Then he closed his lips and clenched his hand into a fist. A blinding flash appeared in his chest. He frowned and hummed thoughtfully. He then pressed his finger on the screen, wanting to see if the core was absorbed well. The system provided information about the main character, as well as his skills and abilities. Jinhyuk had the first level, but had 12 stats available. The main character grinned and thought that this was the strongest first level. An hour later, headlines appeared online about the first victory against the Mangrove of Greed. The system reported that a video related to this event was posted 10 minutes later. People left a lot of comments. Their opinions were completely different. Jinhyuk imagined people typing on phones and computer keyboards and thought that, except for a few comments at the beginning, everyone was sure that this news was absurd. The system reported that the video was downloaded. On the screen was Jinhyuk, whose face was hidden by a mosaic. He thought that as soon as the video was uploaded online, all doubts disappeared instantly. Netizens left even more comments expressing their admiration. A shot of the main character attacking a tree appeared and Jinhyuk thought that some people were excited and some were not, but people who saw the video had the same reaction. The main character pursed his lips, his gaze looked serious. The user under the name Kingsman introduced himself as director Park Hoshik. He offered the main character to enter into a contract. A user named Black Dragon commented that Jinhyuk would definitely contact him and that he would give him as much money as the main character asks for. Jinhyuk looked at the phone screen, asking if it was really that incredible, and then said that defeating the mangrove tree of greed while being at the first level is not easy. Sitting in his chair, he added that at the same time it was not so surprising. The main character looked to the side and thought that other people had never reached the second part of the tower. He constantly forgot that he should not judge others by himself. Jinhyuk looked at the computer and thought about the mentioned 1 billion, and then remembered that he lived a hard life during which he could hardly even earn enough to eat. There was a video camera on the windowsill, and the main character thought that he was often late on rent. There was fast food on the table. Jinhyuk thought that there were even times when, saving money for food for mukbang, he could go hungry for several days. Jinhyuk was holding a drink in his hand and eating. He thought that if he had been offered this money a day ago, he would have accepted their offer without hesitation. He remembered standing in front of the destroyed tree and thinking that now he was not going to share the information he had, even for $1 or $10 billion. Jinhyuk clenched his hand into a fist and grinned contentedly. He remembered his fight with the tree and thought that the most important thing now was the monopolization of information. Holding the phone in his hands, the main character thought about the next place he would go. He imagined a tall, dark building and thought that while he was busy playing the game, the mana flowing out of the Tower of Trials had filled all areas of Seoul. And if anything had been changed, it would be the relics that were outside the tower and subsequently became sacred. Behind the glass was a long sword, illuminated by 2 small spotlights. The weapons began to evaporate, and the main character thought that the sacred relics, which have abilities from legends, are in the tower, so now Jinhyuk is talking about a replica, or in other words, a duplicate. Looking at his phone, he thought about the place where he could get the most lions. The main character stood in front of the People's Central Museum. A jug, a shield, a sword, and a scroll with hieroglyphs were floating in the air, and Jinhyuk thought that the National People's Museum was a place where many relics were kept, and it was like a kind of treasure warehouse. The protagonist frowned and thought that the problem was that he was not the only one targeting them, and unlike the mangrove tree of greed, which only appeared in 7 places in Seoul, the People's Central Museum was only one, and many would definitely gather from all areas those wishing to obtain relics. He imagined 4 people whose faces were difficult to see, and came to the conclusion that among them there would be old people. Jinhyuk grabbed the doorknob. The system reported that he had entered the event area. The main character opened the door and thought that it was quieter than he expected. He assumed that no one had come yet. Suddenly Jinhyuk clenched his teeth tensely. Putting his hands in his pockets, he thought that, as expected, someone had managed to come first. Someone's burnt corpse could be seen against the charred wall. The main character put his hands in his pockets and thought that the world had changed, so he assumed that people were also changing after him. But the difference between expectation and reality turned out to be significant, and within a day everyone became too fearless. He looked at the stairs and thought that they were targeting the sacred relics that were kept in the halls of the Middle and Modern Ages. Jinhyuk presented the Didoyanjido map, a relic that everyone wants to get their hands on. The main character thought that they did not want to look at the 8 provinces of the Republic of Korea, and since the ancient map is saturated with mana and stores information about the Tower of Trials, everyone wants to possess it. There were marks on the map, and Jinhyuk thought that it described in detail where to find the labyrinth with ruins, and what objects and monsters there were. The main character imagined many human hands reaching up, and thought that there was no information above the 10th floor, but this was enough to light a fire in people's eyes. He thought that everyone only wants this card, but they don't know that the truly valuable sacred treasures are hidden in the clay. A pitcher fell to the floor as someone screamed furiously. Many people were fighting among themselves. There were shrapnel on the floor and bloodstains were visible. Someone opened his mouth wide, deafeningly ordering everyone to freeze. The young man with black hair, who was holding his opponent by the clothes, turned around. The broad-shouldered man crossed his arms and said that whoever moves from now on is considered dead. The young man in the blue t-shirt frowned and told him not to talk nonsense. The young man with a plaster on his cheek said with a grin that no one here would be afraid of such words. Blood dripped from the hammer, and the man listened with a displeased look as he threatened to crush his skull. Suddenly the man clenched his teeth, his eyes turned red, and he hissed angrily that they really didn't understand the words. He clenched his hands into fists and began to scream loudly, tearing the fabric of his clothes. The girl with short hair asked in shock if this man had a personal ability, and the boy with the bandage on his face said that it was dangerous. The man turned into a gray-skinned monster and declared that the card belonged to him. He clenched his jaw angrily, his eyes emitting a red light. The old man in the blue vest closed his eyes and said with a laugh that he could not agree with these words. The man frowned, asking if he was crazy. Janu walked closer to the man and introduced himself. He frowned and yelled loudly so that the old man would already understand the situation and disappear, and that he could wring John's withered neck like a shaking chicken's head. John said with a slight smile that the man was very rude. Then he snapped his finger. With an angry expression on his face, the old man asked whether the man would quickly break his neck or turn him into a coal. Fire appeared on John's finger. The man frowned in shock, suggesting that it was magic. The old man extended his hand forward and released a fiery attack towards the enemy. The man's eyes reflected the flames approaching him. The fire completely engulfed his body, causing him to turn black and scream in pain. All that was left of the man was smoldering flesh. He opened his mouth wide and thick steam came out. John, who put his hands behind his back, turned away and said that this was a disaster brought on by the man's tongue. The old man smiled as Yuri came up behind him. He asked her to get the items and take care of the rest after that. The girl said with a smile that John could rely on her. She touched the small statue of Anubis and said that he would be enough. Yuri's eyes began to emit a purple light. Bright lines appeared around her, and she said that he would deal with anyone who decided to stop them. The man in the wolf mask held a long spear tightly in his hand. A dark silhouette of a creature with sharp fangs and red eyes could be seen. The figurine darkened against the backdrop of a blinding flash. The gold sparkled. Yellow lines were visible on Anubis's body, creating patterns. Yuri crossed her arms, saying human. Whoever moves from his place will be considered an enemy of Anubis. The black-skinned warrior raised his weapon. The girl smiled and offered to cooperate. The young men looked at her in horror. One of them asked why there were so many awakened old people here. Bloody weapons fell to the floor and they screamed that they were giving up the card or anything else. Yuri clapped her hands happily and thanked them. Suddenly a look of surprise appeared on her face. Someone stepped on the fragments. The main character put his hands in his pants pockets and walked around the room. He tilted his head and pointed at the mess. Jinhyuk walked over to the crumpled scrolls and came to the conclusion that these people didn't even have basic antique etiquette. Shaking off the yellowed paper, he said it was a relief that nothing had been torn. The main character bowed his head and fell silent when he heard his name called. Yuri, her eyes burning with rage, asked if it looked like she was joking with him. Anubis stomped his foot, sending dust into the air. The girl with a crazy smile ordered him to kill Jinhyuk. The monster opened its mouth and rushed towards the main character, holding a spear in its hand. Jinhyuk stood motionless. He frowned as the spear blade came in front of him. The main character waved his hand. The weapon fell to the floor behind him. Yuri opened her mouth in surprise. There was a deep crack on the floor behind Jinhyuk. Those around him couldn't believe what he had just done. Two guys looked at him with their mouths open in surprise and discussed what had happened. They did not notice how the guy dodged. Besides, his hands were fine. The main character smiled and thought that these people did not know how much stat he had. He looked at the dark figure of the ancient Egyptian deity and asked Yuri what she was going to do after losing her only weapon. The schoolgirl bowed her head, opened her backpack and said that no one said that she only owned one figurine. She pulled out dark objects from her school bag. A magical glow surrounded the figurines of ancient Egyptian gods. They hovered in the air. The system notified that a replica of a sacred relic called the Incarnation of Anubis had awakened. The main character's eyes widened in surprise. He watched what was happening with his mouth open. Sweat flowed down the girl's face. Dark streams of energy surrounded her. She asked Jinhyuk what he thought about it. Yuri stood behind a group of dark creatures. She asked the main character if he still felt the urge to laugh. The guy smiled, called her idea a good one and thought that she had a good level if she was able to maintain 5 of these things with such a small amount of mana. The main character imagined an old man with glowing eyes and thought that there were many experienced players like John. He remembered how the fire engulfed the body of the guy who insulted the man. Yuri looked at him displeased, clenched her teeth and quoted his words. Jinhyuk raised his hand to show the approximate level and said that to be precise, he rates it somewhere between good and acceptable. The girl looked at him with displeasure and said that he was trying to act cool and that she didn't like him. The main character squinted, looked displeasedly at the schoolgirl, opened his mouth and said that in this case it would be better to show her himself. He clutched an old piece of paper in his hands and thought that it was impossible to feel the difference if the skills were too different. Jinhyuk threw a piece of paper into the air and thought that a small demonstration would be enough for Yuri to see everything with her own eyes and understand what he was talking about. A tiger was drawn on the sheet, and streams of magical energy emanated from the raised palm of the protagonist. The system window said that he had injected mana into the Pine Tiger Sacred Religion replica. The guy tilted his head forward and smiled. The system notified the appearance of the ruler of the mountain. The main character extended his hand forward, guiding the tiger that appeared at his side. Yuri's eyes widened in fear. She clenched her teeth and said that this was impossible. The ground shook from the paws of the animal. The tiger's eyes glowed yellow. The system window said that it was an unnamed creature from the Joseon era. The ancient Egyptian creature bared its teeth. Jinhyuk stroked the tiger and asked how dare some jackal show his teeth to the ruler of the mountains. He waved his hand. The main character pointed his finger at his opponents and said that food was served. The tiger opened its mouth and rushed forward. The opponent raised his shield and growled. The ruler of the mountains raised his clawed paw. A horizontal stripe appeared as the tiger cut off the enemy's head with a wave of its paw. The 3 other incarnations of Anubis bared their teeth and raised their spears. The tiger opened his mouth wide and roared. The animal knocked down another opponent. The muzzle of the ruler of the mountains was stained with blood due to the fact that he tore his enemies to pieces. His eyes continued to glow and he moved so fast that the image was blurry. Sweat was running down the girl's face. She couldn't believe what was happening. Yuri froze in front of the black figure and thought that she had heard of different ways to use sacred relics, but had never heard of this method. She raised her head and thought that the mana emanating from the creature felt like her skin was being torn off. A white flash appeared in front of the girl. She realized that she could not win. Yuri fell to her knees. Her eyes were shining with tears. She was upset because she thought that she had obtained the most powerful items, but she was wrong. The guy put his hands in his pockets and walked up to her. The girl thought with irritation about who this man was. Jinhyuk stopped in front of Yuri sitting on the floor. She pressed her hand to her chest. The main character smiled and ordered her to give the item. Sweat ran down the girl's face. She opened her mouth and asked what he was talking about. The main character sat down next to her, looked displeasingly at the schoolgirl and demanded that she give up the Tutankhamun mask. Yuri frowned, clenched her teeth and asked where he was going to use this item, since it was useless in Korea. Jinhyuk narrowed his eyes and looked at her intently. He raised his finger and moved it, calling someone to him. A tiger's face appeared in front of Yuri, and she stuttered and said that she would give everything up. An open backpack lay on the ground among the shards of glass. A mask with the face of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh hung in the air. The system reported that a replica of the relic mask of Tutankhamun was received. The main character squeezed the object in his hand and thought that he had easily obtained the second sacred relic. The girl raised one eyebrow and asked if he was targeting Tedunjido's card. Jinhyuk tilted his head and said that it was none of her business, but in reality he just forgot about the card. He stroked the tiger and asked the creature to check everything. The animal bared its teeth when the protagonist said that no one should follow him. Yuri pressed her hand to her chest and looked at the tiger in horror. The ruler of the mountain opened his mouth. Dark streams of power emanated from his paws. The main character watched what was happening over his shoulder and thought with satisfaction that all preparations were completed. He looked at the steps leading up and thought that the time had come. Jinhyuk raised his hand and thought that he should get the strongest skill of the trial tower. There were numbers and letters written on the wall indicating the floor. In a dark room, under protective glass, there was a luminous vase. Sweat was running down the old man's face. He didn't understand how Yuri allowed this to happen. The elderly man and the main character stood nearby. Jinhyuk clenched his fingers into a fist and thought that it was not so easy for John to get here. Continuing to sweat, the man thought about how this guy was able to get past Yuri. The doorway in front of them glowed blue. The guy pressed his hand to his face and said that it looks like this is a level 1 barrier. John closed his eyes and said that it looks like the guy knows about it. He reached out, touched the barrier and said that this was the first time he had seen something like this. The man shook his hand and said that physical impact and magical attack would be useless. Jinhyuk extended his hand towards the barrier. He closed his eyes and thought that he needed to find a place where the flow of magic diverged. Blue smoke emanated from a white ball, inside of which there was some kind of inscription. The main character opened his eyes and mentally said the word Carpo. Without lifting his hand from the barrier, he turned to John and said that he seemed to know how to destroy the barrier, but he had one condition. The man closed his eyes and asked what he meant by condition. Jinhyuk opened his mouth and said that if John Woo continuously applied his flame magic to the barrier, they would be able to weaken it. The guy pointed at himself and said that this would have to be done until he returned with the necessary relics. John rubbed his chin, smiled and said that it turns out he should stand outside and influence the barrier while the main character is inside. Jinhyuk gritted his teeth, waved his hand, and said that he himself cannot continuously use powerful attack magic that can damage the barrier. Although his proposal sounds dubious, but they have only one way out, because dawn will come soon, so he is ready to give the old man the card and take something else for yourself. John Woo frowned and thought that the worst possible outcome would be that he would receive nothing for his work. The man closed his eyes and asked the main character, and he promised that he would give the card to him. The guy smiled and said that he did not want to become an enemy of a person who possesses high-level magic. The main character narrowed his eyes and looked at Jonah in confusion, who sighed and thought that he had no other options but to trust this man. The man hid his hands behind his back and told the guy that he believed him. The young man looked at the barrier and asked to take care of it. The fire enveloped John's hand. He bowed his head and said that he would do his best. He gritted his teeth with effort and summoned even more magic. He directed a stream of fire at the barrier, preventing them from passing. The shield cracked from contact with the fire. Jinhyuk frowned, shouted that he went and mentally said the word Carpo. He covered his face with his hands and jumped through the barrier. The guy landed on his feet. With sweat running down the man's face, John opened his mouth and told the guy to hurry up. The main character smiled, waved and thought that he planned to try his best. The guy turned away and mentally added that he would do everything his own way. Behind the glass lay a book with ancient hieroglyphs on the cover. Magic sparks came from the traditional Korean outfit. The rectangular object also released magical energy. Jin-hyuk hid his hands in his pockets, looked around and thought that, unlike the lower floor, everything here looks as if no one has been here. He looked at the broken display case. This was the only exception. The system window said that there was a sword engraved with Kyan Lam. The main character imagined a man with a sword and thought that this man took what he wanted, put a protective barrier on the room and left. The guy pursed his lips and thought with disapproval that the man didn't want to take risks, so he just took what he came for and left, despite the fighting people. Jin-hyuk walked up to the broken display case and started counting something. The main character smiled and said that he had found what he needed, rejoicing that the player ahead of him did not suspect that he had taken the second most important relic. On the red pillow lay a bunch of gold coins. The system window said that these were coins from the Lai dynasty. Jin-hyuk took the item in his hands and thought that this was the last element needed to create a unique strong skill. The guy narrowed his eyes. He squeezed the right eye of the Tutankhamun mask, and there was a ceremonial Persian casting mold on the table. He watched with a smile as the golden streams of energy surrounded him. Energy emanated from the eye that lay on the ceremonial Persian uniform. The system notified that a reaction had occurred between the two relics. The guy pulled the thread and thought that if he wants to move forward, he needs to pay the appropriate price. He broke the thread on which the coins were strung. Jin-hyuk waved his hand and the coins began to fall down. The main character put his hands in front of him, protecting himself from the golden streams of power. The system reported that a reaction had occurred between the three relics. The system window said that Jin-hyuk had overcome the disgusting probability percentage and succeeded in unification. Without lowering his hands, the guy smiled. The system notified that a new relic of the Eye of Truth of rank SS had been received. A golden glow surrounded the black eye. In the system window it was said that this relic allows you to open a window of another person's state and distinguish truth from lies 3 times a day. The main character looked at the object hovering above his palm and thought that the Eye of Truth was the best among the 5 eyes existing in the world, but he did not come to the museum that night for this. The system sent a notification that Jin-hyuk completed a hidden quest by combining 3 replicas below Class B to create an SS class item. Blue streams of energy surrounded his legs. The system window said that he had fulfilled the necessary conditions. The guy closed his eyes. The main character imagined white squares and thought that he would copy and collect the abilities that exist in this world, and then use these skills to create stronger ones. Jin-hyuk imagined a flash of light and thought that this would be his weapon to become the strongest in the trial tower. His body was surrounded by blue streams of energy. The system reported that he had received the personal ability of unification and that the memories of the world were in the process of being created. The system window contained information about the protagonist's personal ability. The level of the fusion skill was impossible to measure. It allowed them to copy other players' personal abilities, store them in the world's memories, and then combine them to create top-level abilities. Jin-hyuk's eyes glowed blue. The system advised that the conditions may be changed if difficulties arise that prevent the skill from being copied. Janu continued to attack the barrier with fire and called out to the protagonist. Sweat was flowing down the man's face and body. He asked the guy to hurry up because he was not sure that he could hold out longer. Jin-hyuk turned his head, pursed his lips, and thought about what he had to do to copy the old man's abilities. His eyes glowed yellow. The man released another stream of fire. The conditions for copying the ability appeared in the system window. It said that since John always hides his feelings, in order to get his abilities, the main character must force him to show true emotions. The guy smiled. He looked contentedly at the system window hanging in front of him and thought that he just needed to anger the old man. Using fire magic, Janu asked his ally to hurry up. With his back to him, the protagonist stated that the old man might not use this skill anymore. The man knitted his eyebrows in confusion, never ceasing to release fire from his hands. Looking around, Jin-hyuk arrogantly added that there was no particular need to use magic. The fire cleared. Janu lowered his hands and asked what this meant and why his ally asked him to do this. The barrier blocking the passage began to disappear. The guy cast the Carpo spell, which was a destruction spell in Latin, with the help of which the barrier was broken through more easily. The player narrowed his eyes as he mentally cast the spell. Covering his face with his hands, he crossed the barrier and the wall of fire. In fact, the old man did not contribute in any way to the destruction of the barrier. The man stretched his hands forward, watching the barrier crumble into small particles. The youth thought that the man's mana was almost completely depleted due to the fact that he believed that his endless attack on the barrier would do no good, although it was impossible to break through it. There was a huge map hanging on the wall. The guy was on the safe side, and now he needs to piss off the old man. Looking at the map, he thought that he already knew everything about the tower down to the smallest detail, so a map with information up to the 10th floor would be absolutely useless to him. Smiling slyly, the young man flicked his lighter, deciding that he was not going to give the card to anyone. Jianwoo screamed out of breath, not understanding what his ally wanted to do. With his eyes flashing, the main character recalled what he had said just recently. Taking the lighter to the card, he stated that he did not need it. The fire broke out and engulfed the poster hanging on the wall. With this map, anyone could find out all the information up to the 10th floor, so there were fears that the player's advantage might disappear. The man opened his mouth in shock. The flames completely engulfed the wall. The surest way to maintain an advantage was to avoid the chance of losing it. Raising his tense hands up, the old man shouted angrily, promising to kill and grind into powder the man who burned the map. The protagonist's eyes lit up. The notification announced the fulfillment of the condition. A blue book appeared above the guy's head. A notification informed about the successful copying of the Fire Element B skill. A save button appeared in front of the book. The new notification said that the copied skill was saved in the memories of the world and that it allows you to control fire and increases affinity with the fire element. Looking at the notifications, Jinhyuk thought that the fire element was a good stat for the first copy. Summoning a fiery clot in his hand, Jianwoo declared that the boy would regret what he had done and would pay for it. Smirking, the player asked if the old man knew why he burned the map. The alert announced the activation of the first level fire element. The guy's hands were engulfed in flames. The man widened his eyes in bewilderment. Looking at the guy's gloating grin and the rising flames, he realized that this was definitely the same skill as his own, but his strength was many times more powerful. John thought that this was no mere mortal in front of him if he had such a high level, and if he really didn't need some kind of card. Beads of sweat ran down his face. Squinting, the man wanted to ask something, but the player interrupted him, grinning and saying that if the old man was going to continue to calmly climb the tower, then he needed to obey him well. The young man went down the stairs. Imagining the faces of the people he met along the way, he thought that, counting himself, only 4 old people appeared in the National Central Museum, and that now that the test tower had become a reality, everyone's desire to reduce risks had become clear. The guy stretched his arms up to warm up. He was worried about the desire to be ahead of everyone by doing this. A status window appeared in the air, describing the player's characteristics and personal abilities. The main character crossed his arms contentedly, thinking that he should take possession of as many personal abilities and skills as possible, no matter what. Jinhyuk hovered over Jianwoo, promising to contact him later. Looking down at the old man, he asked him to raise his level with the girl on the bottom floor. The man humbly knitted his eyebrows. The player received a toy with which he could do whatever he wanted for a long time. The girl pursed her lips in fear. The skill book was covered with a blue haze. The player had a long way to go, so the first thing he needed to do was collect the most necessary abilities for him. Walking down the street, he thought that he only had one body, so he did not have the opportunity to monopolize absolutely all ironic destinies. Smiling, the guy decided that he could only get a few. Putting his hands in his pockets, he realized that the coolest and most important destinies would be in his hands. Hearing the sounds of an unhappy stomach, the young man put his hand to his stomach and said that this was his limit. It was time for rice soup, and there was a cafe sign above the glass door. The people inside looked worriedly at something in front of them, not understanding what it was. Their eyes were fixed on the television. The news anchor announced that an incident had occurred at the National Central Museum in which at least 23 people were killed and more than 50 were injured. The man in formal attire added that some of the victims were seriously wounded, so the death toll would continue to rise, and he said that the instigators were allegedly targeting relics kept in the museum. The news showed a destroyed building. Attacks occurred not only in South Korea, but also in the United States, Europe, China, and Japan. The next shot showed the destroyed Louvre. The news anchor stated that similar incidents were happening all over the world. Sitting down at the table, the guy thought that, as expected, players in other countries were also not sitting idle, preparing to conquer the tower. Looking to the side, the journalist suggested watching a CCTV video filmed inside the building. One of the frames showed Yuri standing next to Anubis. In another shot, a man with a blurred face waved his hand. In the third frame, a huge tiger sank its fangs into the body of the enemy. The presenter said that it was hard to believe, but all this happened in reality. One of the cafe visitors, watching what was happening on the screen, asked if an ordinary person could do this, and suggested that this was the guy who had recently appeared in the Trial Tower community. Remembering the video of the destruction of the mangrove tree, he remembered the familiar movements, scratching his temple. The main character thought that there were too many people who began to recognize him, and that he needed to think about how to hide his identity. Looking at the camera, the news anchor announced that the government was investigating the origins of a building of unknown origin called the Test Tower, and that a special department, the Association of the Awoken, had been founded for employees who could now use special abilities. Curling his fingers thoughtfully, Jinhyuk decided that the government had reacted faster than one might have thought. Pouring water into a glass, he thought that, Judging by the fact that they had formed a department of people who had already awakened personal abilities, they had decided to accept what happened in the museum as something inevitable, although, in his opinion, it would take at least a few weeks before such a decision is made. The news anchor offered to meet with the participants and listen to the details. Holding a glass of water in his hands, the guy looked at the TV. A man with a scar on his face appeared on the screen, introducing himself as Sanjin, the head of the Awoken Association. The player frowned when he saw him. The man knitted his eyebrows sternly, saying that the reason he was here was to recruit awakened ones, and that everything would depend on the level of the players. But the government promised that the pay would be that of a 7th grade civil servant, and the minimum annual salary would be 60 million won. Hearing that the people who appeared on the broadcast would be an exception, the guy looked at the TV from under his brows. Maintaining a confident look, Sanjin said that he was ready to put the name of the head of the association on the line. Raising his eyebrows, he promised that if these people joined the association, all their needs would be financed by the government, no matter what they wished for. One of the cafe visitors said that he envied these people, no matter who they were. The girl called the sharp turn in their lives incredible. Smirking, the young man thought that, in the end, he was their target, since they said about the people who appeared on the broadcast. The government considered him a serious threat. Hiding his smile with his hand, the main character thought that he was not going to belong to anyone, no matter what price they offered him. Imagining the head of the association with his hands clasped, he thought that one experienced person had much more value than 100 similar players. And since Sanjin also understood this, the man tried to lure such a person to his side by luring him with a bank check. Looking at the TV screen, the player wondered if the fact that Changjin was entrusted with the position of head of the association meant that he had a pretty good ability. Putting his hand to his chin, Jinhak wondered if the man was invited to this position because of his experience in the test tower, but hoped that he did have a good ability. Smiling, he concluded that he would certainly feel the beauty of copying. The guy looked at the wall clock. The time showed exactly 7 in the evening. The hands on the clock showed different times. When the hour hand points to the new time, the tower of tests will open, stars twinkling above the tower that rushes into the sky. The notification announced that the challenge tower had been opened. Players found themselves in front of a river with floating islands floating above it. The main character stood among them. People urged not to crowd. Someone said that this was completely the same as what they had done before. Smiling, the guy thought that everyone looked so much like newcomers. A bag of coins appeared in the air. A notification said that in honor of entering the tower, 100 coins were given out that could be used inside the tower. Gold coins fell from the sky. Notifications explained that players must film their achievements and upload them publicly to receive 100 coins for every 10,000 views. The commission will vary depending on the level. A blue eye with a plus sign appeared in the air. The notification said that viewing videos by those living outside the tower only counts on the first view, so players need to be careful when choosing videos to watch. The man in the robe spread his arms in front of the army of monsters. The notification said that the live broadcast function can only be used when clearing boss monsters to get to the next floor. The old man in armor looked at his hand. The minotaur let out a loud roar. A skull with the inscription warning appeared in the air. The alert said that if falsification of views and other illegal actions are detected, appropriate measures will be taken. The guy thoughtfully put his hand to his chin, realizing something. Residents of the city fixed their gaze on their phone screens. The live broadcast system was a bridge connecting the people rising in the tower and those who lived outside. Viewers watched the video, wanting to see the end of the tower, and thereby increase views. One of the videos depicted pagodas. 900 people watched it. In another video, the warrior stood with his back to the camera. In the third video, the player was about to defeat the dragon with his bare hands, while 1,200 people watched. In front of a huge number of videos, gold coins fell. This system through which famous people could earn money was the most interesting installation of the challenge tower. The people ran forward, planning to first conquer the goblin cave in order to hunt, get their share and have fun. Someone hit the guy with their shoulder. The man pushed him away. The main character thought that everyone was in too much of a hurry. Standing in the middle of people running forward, he assumed that the newcomers wanted to clear this place as quickly as possible and be ahead of everyone. But for him, getting coins was not difficult, because he already knew everything. But the guy was not going to upload the video so as not to share important information, even despite the reward. Looking back, he decided that this could cause him great damage. Satisfied with his hands in his pockets, Jinhak had already decided what he needed to do first. Smiling, the guy thought that this was a slightly different road, different from the others. At that time, after clearing the beginning of the 30th floor of the tower, there was a period when there was no way to advance further. So the player collected hidden parts, searching the lower floors to climb to the next ones. The young man pulled back the lid of the stone box. Using a torch, he searched it. Moving further through the dark dungeon, the guy constantly analyzed every step of the path traveled. The light of the torch illuminated the carved walls of the dungeon. The player managed to find solutions in the ruins alone. His expression suddenly became very tense. Dropping the torch, he realized that his character was worthless from the very beginning. His hand, clenched into a fist, shook with anger. The result of searching all the lower floors was the realization that the character whom the player had been leveling up, having spent several years in suffering, was himself pathetic. A notification popped up asking you to confirm deleting the character. The guy clenched his teeth in disappointment, thinking that he had devoted himself entirely to such absurdity. Time spent on doubt was an unaffordable luxury for him, so he decided to go all the way from the very beginning and confirm the deletion of the character. Blue particles sparkled around his body. With his eyes flashing, the main character decided to definitely reach the end next time. Looking up at the sky, he thought it was 6 years ago. In front of him stood a huge gate strewn with human skulls and bones. A notification said that inside was the Level B Labyrinth of Crete, the feature of which was incredible intricacy, and the presence of traps of various types. Crossing his arms over his chest, Jin-hyuk thought that the foundation for a breakthrough above the 30th floor would be the accumulation of the base, and the key to the essence of the cleanup was in the Livarento's labyrinth. Gritting his teeth, the guy thought that he didn't expect to have to do this again. By touching the gate, blue runes appeared in front of them. Having opened the gate, the player decided to start walking through the labyrinth. The entrance to the labyrinth appeared in front of him. Ancient Greeks were depicted on the walls. On the floor in front of the entrance to the labyrinth stood a bust of a bull. Seeing a familiar picture and smelling a familiar smell, the guy smiled. White butterflies were flying under the ceiling. One of them flapped its wings and descended. The insect landed on the finger of the player, who was glad to see them. Suddenly he looked back. Seeing a crowd of people in front of him, the young man asked who they were. The girl smiled, stating that they were looking for a place to hunt and, seeing an open labyrinth, decided to go in before it closed. 10 minutes ago, before the invasion of the labyrinth, the squad noticed how someone opened the gate. A guy with red hair said that they followed a man who showed by his appearance that he knew something. Another member of the squad asked why this person immediately went into the labyrinth. They were surprised that the player managed to open the door of the labyrinth without a key. Looking down, the girl offered to follow him. The blonde crossed his arms and protested, saying that they didn't know what type of labyrinth it was or how big it was. Leaning on a tree, the girl said that they need to think with their heads, because they know very well what is most important at the beginning of the Tower of Tests. Looking up, she explained that the player had entered the labyrinth without a key and that the dungeon was on the first level, which meant that its degree of difficulty was not that high. Looking after the man entering the labyrinth, the squad member concluded that this was possible because the labyrinth was located on the first floor. Blowing a bubblegum bubble, another girl asked if this person would obediently share objects with them. Smirking, her ally replied in the negative. Looking at the labyrinth with burning eyes, she declared that the squad would force this player to remain in the dungeon forever. Smiling sweetly, the girl said that her squad saw an open labyrinth and decided to go into it. The other team members stood behind her. The girl stated that it would be better if they entered the maze altogether, because the more people sharing the burden of danger, the better. The main character thought that these guys were confident in their numerical superiority and were trying to outwit him. His eye lit up. A notification announced the activation of the Eye of Truth. Pointing at herself with her hand, the girl said her name and said that she was 22 years old and that earlier she had reached the second floor of the test tower. In the status window that appeared, it was said that Pakana had the skills Contact, Quick Step and Weak Healing. Seeing the inscription Skill Contact, the guy thought that this was a rather interesting ability, allowing one to get closer to an object encountered for the first time in a natural way. The notifications that popped up also suggested that a feature of this skill was the ability to get rid of the feeling of awkwardness, and the condition for copying was being alone with the owner of the ability and for 240 hours. Remembering the woman with demonic wings, the main character thought that Contact would help control her. A guy with red hair standing behind the leader of the squad introduced himself as Kalsik and said that he curled up in the process of passing the first floor. The girl in the lilac sweatshirt introduced herself as Hemin and added that she also only went to the first floor. Blowing up a bubblegum ball, the girl named Jangmina said that she went to the third floor. The blonde introduced himself as Minguk and stated that he had never played the Tower of Challenges. The guy with glasses scratched the back of his head, introducing himself to Quan and saying that this was also his first trip to the tower. The main character smiled and said his name. Turning away, he thought that the squad could hit him in the back of the head at any moment, so there was no need to remember their names. Pakhana hugged his hand and called him by name. Looking into his eyes, the girl asked which floor in the test tower he had reached. Pressing close to him, the squad leader activated the first level Contact skill. The girl smiled sweetly. Red flowers appeared around them. Turning her back to him and replying that he had risen as far as he could, Jin-hyuk understood how this skill worked and thought that if he did not know about the existence of such an ability, then it would have worked. Raising her eyebrows in surprise, Pakhana asked herself what went wrong, because the effect of Contact should have already manifested itself. Hiding her hands behind her back, she asked her new ally to tell her what types of monsters there were in the labyrinth and what abilities they had. The guy agreed, squinting his eyes in displeasure. Butterflies were flying above him. Looking at the squad, the player stated that this labyrinth changes every time at a certain hour. The team members opened their mouths in surprise. The floor began to shake under their feet. Minguk looked around and asked what was going on. Raising her eyebrows in fear, Pakana said that it was just a first-level labyrinth and asked what it was. Stone blocks began to emerge from the walls. One of them appeared right in front of the girl. Someone shouted to her to be careful. A second before the collision, the leader of the squad jumped to the side. Pointing his finger at his friend, Kalsik said that if he stood in one place, he would die and asked him to look up. A huge stone block fell from the ceiling, destroying the dungeon floor. The guys, trying to catch their breath, fell to the ground. The movement of the plate stopped. Dripping with sweat, Pakana looked back. With her hands on her knees, Hyaman said that she didn't see Jangmina. Chalsik gritted his teeth and said that the appearance of such a labyrinth on the first floor is absurd, because everything on the first floor should be the same, except for the ruins. Shaking off the dust, the main character asked if the members of the squad had been to the changing labyrinth at least once. Someone asked how anyone could have visited such a place. Knitting her eyebrows together in frustration, the squad leader said that this was too dangerous for the first level and that they needed to get out of here now. Looking at Hyaman, the girl asked her to find a way out using her ability. Hyaman replied that during the change in the labyrinth, her ability was deactivated, and tears appeared in her eyes. Having widened her eyes in fear, Panhaka realized that they were locked here, not even having the opportunity to find an emergency exit. As Jinhak watched the girls talk, he realized that the group, full of confidence, had only entered the labyrinth because of their ability to navigate, because they thought that knowing about the labyrinth would turn their foray into a trip to the neighborhood supermarket. Looking down, the guy thought that these people were stupid and realized that it was almost time for something to appear. The leader of the squad clenched her teeth in displeasure. Looking at the player facing her, she called out to him. Rushing towards him, Pakana asked why the guy didn't warn them in advance about such an important thing as changing the labyrinth. Pointing her finger at him, the girl said that because of him they almost died and many suffered. Kalsik also pointed his finger at the player and agreed with his friend, saying that only the young man knew about everything. Putting his hands on his belt, Quanwu added that because of him, Jangmina ended up on the other side of the walls. The guy sighed. Frowning, the main character asked if he asked the squad to follow him. Pakana opened her mouth in amazement. The player with burning eyes stated that they came here on their own and no one dragged them by force. Minguk gritted his teeth angrily, saying that in addition to being locked in the maze, he was in a very bad mood. A weapon materialized in his hand. Holding a sword in his hands, the blonde shouted that he didn't like the player from the moment he first saw him. Furiously knitting his eyebrows, the boy wanted to say something, but a strange sound was heard. The axe hit the wall with a crash. Minguk fell to the ground, dropping his weapon as blood gushed from his body. Holding her hands to her chest, Hyaman fearfully called out to her friend, her mouth open. Quanwu asked how this happened. A huge hoof hit the ground. The Minotaur opened its mouth wide and let out a loud roar. The squad watched in fear as the enemy appeared. Weapons appeared in the hands of the guys. A bloody axe was sticking out of the wall. Suddenly he disappeared, leaving a crack on the wall. Taking the axe in his hands, the Minotaur swung it to strike. Raising her eyebrows in shock, Pakana thought that now they would definitely die. The main character jumped out of his seat, ordering the squad to move aside. Putting his hands behind his back, he rushed towards the enemy, leaving the guys behind. The leader of the squad watched him in fear, not understanding what he was doing. Just as the monster was about to strike with his axe, Jinhyuk ran up close to him. The monster hit the ground in front of him with force, throwing shards of tile into the air. The player ended up in the air directly above the enemy's head, a notification announcing that the dodge was successful. Smiling, he thought this was a great opportunity. The wound on his shoulder didn't bother him at all. The notification said that the hidden breach stat had been obtained. In the new notification it was written that this stat reduces the excessive difference in levels in a battle with a strong opponent and, conversely, increases it in a battle with a weak opponent. By grabbing the horn of a monster, the player thought that the difference in levels decreases for every 3 points. The Minotaur clenched his teeth in anger when he noticed him. The guy landed on the floor. This skill allowed him to grow even while remaining at the first level. The monster's eyes lit up. The young man thought that this was the only way that he had learned about through countless trials and errors. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. Opening its fanged mouth, the monster again raised the axe above its head. Having dodged the attack, the main character thought that he had already been hit by these attacks tens of thousands of times. The notification reported that the breach stat had been increased by 500s. After another evasion, another similar message appeared. The player's body remembered all the patterns of this monster. Thanks to numerous evasions, identical notifications appeared in the air one after another. The Minotaur once again swung his axe. Jumping at the right moment to dodge, Jinhyuk thought that he was an old man. The breach stat was increased again. Jumping back, away from the enemy, the guy thought that no matter how strong his attacks were, they were of no use if they did not reach their target. The squad members opened their mouths in surprise. Mingak asked if they really wanted to deceive such a person. With her eyes widening in fear, Pakana thought that it was crazy to plan to kill such a monster and take away the rewards. The Minotaur clenched his teeth furiously. The player smirked, stating that his enemy was swinging the axe very slowly over and over again, but still hoped to hit at least once. The monster bared its fangs and growled. The axe headed towards the enemy. The blade ended up right at the guy's neck, but the way to become stronger in a short time was simple. This method was to take a chance by placing a bet and putting your life on the line. The blade flew past. A small cut appeared on the neck. The reward was given based on the life-threatening danger. The notification said that the player managed to evade a fatal attack at the last second, so the breach stat was increased by 1. Looking at the notifications, the young man thought that getting 1 stat point for a scratch was a good exchange. His fingers were stained with blood. Having dodged the next blow, he thought that the situation would become much more dangerous if he made a slight mistake, so he needed to finish it. Looking at the squad standing by the wall, the main character thought that the secondary characters had decided to leave of their own free will. Grabbing her friend's hand, Hyaman said that she wanted to leave here as quickly as possible. Pakana asked her to walk, leaning on the wall, because then there would definitely be a way out. Approaching her from behind, the player asked where they were going. The girl looked at him in fear, trying to say something. She opened her mouth in shock when she saw something in front of her. Pointing to the Minotaur, Jinhyuk said that the squad should join the battle if they also want to get stats, because they will be given a hidden stat if the guys dodge attacks. He added that rewards should be shared. The monster swung his huge axe for another blow. Pakana jumped back. Hyaman put her hand forward in fear. The leader of the squad began to cry, her mouth open in horror. A powerful blow rolled across the entire room, destroying everything in its path. Kalsik ended up on the ground in front of a pool of blood. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes. Smiling, the player stated that they could not stand like a pillar and that they needed to dodge and keep their distance. Looking at the Minotaur, he asked him if it was true. Some noise made the monster stop a meter away from his enemy. A stone block next to him appeared from the wall. The labyrinth began to move again. The stone slabs began to be rebuilt. One of the walls that appeared separated the opponents. Waving his hand, the guy promised to see the monster later. The wall closed the passage, leaving the Minotaur alone. The monster clenched his teeth in displeasure, steam coming from his mouth. Opening his mouth, he raised the axe above his head. The sound of the impact shook the entire dungeon. Butterflies were still flying around the ceiling. Pakana leaned over to catch her breath. Kalsik, sitting next to him, said that they, too, could have died, like Minguk and Hyaman. The girl replied that now the enemy would not be able to pursue them. After introducing a white butterfly, the protagonist said that the pollen from the glowing moths he recently touched was attracting the Minotaur, so it was possible that the monster would continue to search for them. Raising her eyebrows in fear, the squad leader asked why their ally would do something so reckless. Looking at her incomprehensibly, the young man replied that he had to raise his stats. Reaching for the knife lying on the ground, he added that every time the maze changes, there is time to rest and replenish stamina. Waving the knife, Jinhyuk stated that it was fun for him when the monster found him. Looking up at him, Pakana asked how long her ally would do this. Sticking his index finger at the shocked squad members, the player replied that he was going to leave the maze in a month. Kalsik helped his friend get up. The girl, thinking that this hell could not last a whole month, said that they would go separately. She decided that if they went on their own, the monster would not chase them. The guy thoughtfully put his hand to his chin, saying that, most likely, this would be the case. Smiling, he asked which direction the survivors were going to go. The guys walked forward along the corridor, but moving without a landmark is many times more dangerous. Kalsik pursed his lips tightly. Someone asked if their ally knew where the exit was. Touching the tip of the knife, the player replied that he knew more about this labyrinth than anyone else, and accordingly he knew the location of the exit. Frowning with displeasure, Pakana thought that they had no other choice. Closing her eyes, the girl said that there was nothing more to do, but the guy interrupted her. Waving his finger, he said that in this world you cannot get something for free, because even for the bus fare you have to pay. The knife was a centimeter from the face of the squad leader. Holding a sparkling knife in his hands, the young man ordered to give him all the available coins. The man, holding a shield in his hands, rushed forward with a sword. The goblins jumped back in fear. A powerful blow from the shield threw them aside. The guy with the bandage on his forehead struck with a sword. The video of his battle was paused, and there were a lot of rave reviews underneath it. The video became popular, gaining more than 1 million views, and someone laughed. Smiling, the hero of the video said that this would be enough. The squad members smiled happily. The guy sitting in front of the laptop adjusted his glasses and said that all the headlines on the message board were only about him and that his fierce battle with the goblins brought in 1,000 coins just from views. Putting his finger to his upper lip, the guy with the headband said that it was all thanks to our common efforts and thanked his team. Another member of the squad, summoning blue arrows pointing upward in his hands, said that the audience probably thought that his friend did everything solo. Because they edited the video very well, the guy with glasses said that no one noticed that the swordsman added buffs. Suddenly the guy in the blindfold raised an eyebrow questioningly. Seeing that a user under the nickname Bald Guy left a negative comment, the person at the computer said that he was ruining everything. Putting his hand to his forehead, the guy in the bandage said not to be upset, because life in this world initially assumed its monopolization by outstanding discoverers. The boy with glasses worriedly called his friend. The notification said that a new video had been uploaded to the Walk of Fame. Because of the new video, the squad's video ratings immediately dropped. Approaching the screen, the guy in the blindfold asked why this happened. The preview video, titled "For the First Time in the World," succeeded in strengthening an object tenfold, showed a shining knife. Looking at the many positive reviews, the young man called it absurd. The number of views exceeded 1 million. 10 minutes ago, the main character crossed his arms over his chest and asked everyone to mind their own business. Waving his hand, he asked the squad to pick moss and prepare a sleeping place, as well as find logs to start a fire. Kalsik agreed and walked away. Gritting his teeth in dissatisfaction, he looked back at his maliciously smiling ally. Looking to the side, Jinhyuk called up the status window and opened the exchange. The message that popped up in front of him said "Welcome to the exchange." Moving his hand over the notification, the guy thought about what he needed to buy. Enchanted tarot cards worth 70 coins appeared in the air. Then a fragment of an old worn bronze key appeared, worth 80 coins. Behind him appeared a piece of a wooden cartwheel worth 300 coins. Then a scroll appeared, a lotto booster worth 10 coins. The player smiled contentedly. These items were no different from garbage that no one would buy. His finger pointed at the purchase confirmation button. The notification thanked for the purchase. The most important thing was the knowledge of how to use these items. Holding his hand over the wave of blue energy, the guy decided to combine the key, tarot cards, and a piece of the wheel. Blue energy surged through his body, a notification announcing that the merger was successful. A wheel of fortune appeared in the air with a picture of fortune in the center. The notice said that this artifact could raise luck to its highest value for 10 minutes, but since it was not completed, the scope of use was limited. The wheel of fortune shone in the air above the young man. Summoning a knife in his hand, he thought that if you do not know the limit of its use, then, to the best of your ability, the luck you receive can be what pushes a person from heaven to earth. Grasping the wheel with his hand, the main character thought that its limit was known to him because his life remembered everything. The wheel spun in the air. A notification announced that the highest luck value had been reached. Sealed scrolls rained down from the sky. The value of the number of scrolls in the inventory was 10. The enhancement lotto was famous for its worst chance of successful enhancement, but now luck was at its maximum level. The probability of success was 100%. The guy raised his sword to the spinning wheel of fortune. Smiling, he decided to use all the scrolls on the dagger, and a flurry of notifications about the successful enhancement began to pour in. The tip of the dagger began to sparkle. It flashed in the owner's hands, a notification announcing that an old level 10 dagger had been received. The new notification said that the player became the first on the Korean server to succeed in creating a level 10 item, for which he was awarded 5,000 coins. The corresponding achievement appeared on the pedestal. The notification stated that starting tomorrow it will be placed on the Walk of Fame for the whole day. The main character swung his new weapon several times. Placing it on his shoulder, he thought that finally a truly worthwhile thing had fallen into his hands. The 10th day of life in hell, Kalsik and Pakana sat on the floor, hugging their knees. There was a fire made from collected branches on the floor. A moss bed lay nearby. There was no food in the dungeon except mushrooms and moss. The girl watched with disgust as her friend ate fly agaric. She looked away. Jinhyuk was lying on a bed next to the fire. A memory surfaced in her head of how they were attacked by a minotaur who regularly came at a certain time. Pakana remembered how she barely managed to slip under a falling stone block. Because of the changing labyrinth, their life turned into a constant struggle on the brink of death. Imagining her forced ally swinging his sword, the girl was amazed at how easily he took it all. Holding her knees tightly, she said that they would die if this continued. Kalsik agreed, saying that this demon would use them and abandon them at the first opportunity. Anonymous comments began to appear before the eyes of the squad leader, giving advice or simply discussing the situation in the labyrinth. Knitting her eyebrows, the girl asked in a whisper if anyone had found information about this man. Users said that no information could be found because YouTube, personal blog, and all information were blocked, and he did not have a broadcast channel. Seeing this, Pakana lowered her head, thinking that they had chosen terrible people for the support group outside the tower. Frowning, she asked if they had passed on the information to the Elder and what the Raven Guild was saying. The anonymous man replied that nothing was known about this labyrinth and that it would take the guild 3 weeks to find them. Putting her hand to her face in disappointment, the girl thought that 3 weeks was too long. Throwing the last piece of mushroom into his mouth, Kalsik asked what they were saying in the guild. His friend replied that there was no information. Looking at her ally sleeping on the floor, she decided to share her thoughts with her friend. The guy was lying on his side with his back to the fire. Pakahana said that if you kill him and hold out a little longer until the Elder arrives, you can survive and get out of this hell. Knitting her eyebrows decisively, the girl said that the main question was how exactly to get rid of the guy. Kalsik picked up a stone lying on the ground, saying that killing it while he was sleeping was the best solution. Raising his hand, the young man said that few people could live with a broken skull. His girlfriend suddenly stopped him, grabbing his arm. Kalsik looked at her incomprehensibly. The girl said that this man has a reaction speed like a real monster. The main character did not move, lying on a moss bed. The leader of the squad said that they were powerless, because there was a high probability of a counterattack, even if they attacked on the sly. Throwing an incredulous look at her, the guy asked what they should do then, because they could not just tolerate this and continue to suffer. Starting to look for something in her purse, Pakana recalled that her friend was a member of the Black Raven Guild and said that he had given her something in case of danger. The leader of the troop took out from her bag the poisonous sting of a giant immature pumpkin wasp, 1 drop of which could kill 100 trolls. Smiling evilly, she proposed to act in a way that could not be resisted. The main character lowered his eyes in displeasure. In his hands was a wooden board with fried moss and mushrooms. It felt like they were making a survival movie. Taking the mushroom with improvised sticks made from mouse bones, the girl said that she needed to catch a mouse or a moth, then there would be something edible besides mushrooms. Jinhyuk, sitting farthest from the fire, asked to give him some more mushrooms and water. The guys immediately fulfilled his request. Putting more mushrooms on the plate, Kalsik noticed that they still had plenty of this nasty stuff. Throwing a disapproving glance at him, the girl mentally called him weak-willed. The main character put a piece of mushroom in his mouth. Anonymous comments were glad that he swallowed the poison. Pakana smiled contentedly. Kalsik watched him, chewing his portion. The plate of mushrooms fell to the floor. Black liquid gushed out of Kalsik's mouth. The guy grabbed his throat. The veins on his body swelled. Jumping up from her seat, the leader of the squad was frightened to see her friend squirming in unbearable pain. Looking at the player, the girl asked if he knew about the poison. The guy asked the counter whether they really thought that he would mindlessly accept food from their hands. Kalsik's body turned black. The player explained that he changed the plates as soon as they were distracted. Summoning the report button in front of him, the young man said that secretly broadcasting live is definitely illegal. Furrowing her brows, Pakna asked what evidence he had. The anonymous users were surprised that anyone had managed to notice this. Looking at the status window, the main character read that the live broadcast can only be turned on during a boss battle, and if cheating and illegal actions are detected, the perpetrators will be punished. The notification clarifies whether the player wants to file a statement about the discovery of illegal actions. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. Jinhyuk said that during the broadcast you need to watch your facial expression. Smiling maliciously, he added that the disappointment on her face was too noticeable. The guy pressed the confirmation button. A notification with the inscription warning sparkled around the frightened Pakna. The notification said that the application had been successfully submitted and all anonymous names had been deleted. The girl pressed her hands to her chest. The live broadcast screen behind her began to disappear. She turned around to look at the screen. The users did not understand what was happening. One by one they were disconnected from the server until there was not a single connected viewer left. Notifications said that these people would not be able to watch the video for a month, and if they violate it again they will be deleted permanently. Seeing that the number of spectators was 0, the girl asked how this happened. A new notice announced that the player's fine had been replaced by a merciless fate. Kalsik's body melted. Pakana turned around, noticing something behind her. The Minotaur walked along the corridor, holding an axe in his hands. The next moment he came around the bend. Seeing the enemies, the monster opened its mouth and let out a battle cry. The monster rushed forward at full speed. Hiding behind the player, the girl asked if he would fight this time. Slapping him on the back, she asked him to tell him where she should hide. The young man turned around, calling her impudent because the girl had recently tried to poison him, and now she was asking for help. Holding her hands to her chest in fear, Pakana stated that he always told them what to do. A plea for help was written on her face, and a notification popped up stating that the conditions for copying the contact skill had been met. The main character gave her an arrogant look and said that he no longer needed her. A skill book materialized above his head. Knitting her eyebrows, the girl said that the guy would regret it. Putting her hand to her chest, she said that her older brother served in the Raven Guild. The thrown axe hit the ground, causing Pakana to jump back. Jin-hyuk jumped into the air, ending up above the monster's head. Having fallen to the ground, the girl watched what was happening. The player asked her to carefully look at what the difference was between him and the guild. He swung the sparkling knife. Making a jerk down, the guy hit the Minotaur right in the back of the head. There was a shallow cut on the monster's head. Swinging its fist, the monster hit the wall, causing its enemy to jump back. The player landed on a stone tile, thinking that he was able to deal damage thanks to his breach skill. The powerful tug caused the rocks under his feet to crumble. Rushing forward, the guy concluded that he couldn't just kill the monster. Noticing something, he glanced to the side. The axe flew over him, forcing the player to slide along the ground. To win, it was enough to create the same situation as last time. Looking at the enemy, the young man clenched his teeth. The notification said that the first level fire element was activated. The flames rushed towards the Minotaur, who put his hands in front of him for protection. Breaking through the flames, the monster screamed furiously. Having rushed past, the main character was able to strike at the monster's legs. The Minotaur fell to one knee. The player was behind him and asked the monster not to rage so much. Grasping the knife tighter, he thought that as muscle builds, the meat becomes tougher. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. The Minotaur lowered his head, steam coming from his mouth. The moment had almost arrived for the monster to use his last card. The monster's eyes lit up. The notification announced that the Guardian of the Labyrinth had activated the 10th level frenzy. The Minotaur straightened his arms and opened his mouth. The muscles in his arms became larger. The hoof pressed through the floor, breaking it into small fragments. Its horns and axe became covered with green energy. The monster bared its fangs and growled furiously. Jin-hyuk confidently held the knife in front of him. Pakana clenched her teeth in fear, wondering if it was possible to somehow defeat such an enemy. The monster's eyes lit up with red fire. His mane stood on end. The 10th level frenzy icon appeared. This skill increased strength, attack speed, and movement speed by 30%. An additional ability was an increase in intelligence, allowing you to speak human language. Opening his mouth, the Minotaur declared that he would tear the man into small pieces. Holding an axe in front of him, he added that he would trample him into dust so that he could never encroach on this place again. The knife was enveloped in a purple haze. The guy said that his mana efficiency had improved a lot compared to before. Holding his weapon out in front of him, the player smiled and called on the enemy to attack. The monster swung his axe, wanting to get even with his opponent. The young man was able to block the attack by raising his knife in time. His blade was able to deflect the blow of even such a powerful weapon. The axe slipped, crashing into the ground. The next blow was blocked by a precise swing of the knife. The Minotaur continued to attack, but all his blows were reflected. Watching the battle from the side, Pakana could not believe her eyes. Opening her mouth in surprise, she realized that her ally had stopped dodging and began to take the full power of the blows. The monster swung its axe with renewed vigor. Even if all the guild members were here, they would not be able to defeat a boss-level monster that had activated a level 10 skill. The girl called the guy crazy, a drop of sweat running down her tense face. The blades of the two weapons crossed again. The young man parried the blow. Pakana did not understand how he could smile in such a situation. Frowning, the main character thought that he was stuck. Imagining how he was drowning in a bottomless abyss, Jin-hyuk thought that with all his soul he hated the reality in which he felt helpless. The notification said that the player had died. That in reality, that in the game the difficulty was like hell. The notification said that the number the breach stats received were 57. Memories of the battle flashed through his mind. The guy clenched his fist victoriously. A huge tiger burst out from behind him. This world reacted to him. Smiling, the player parried another blow, and a notification about increasing the breach stat popped up. Thanks to the knife, he managed to avoid being hit. The axe made a hole in the stone slab. The Minotaur raised one eyebrow in confusion. Stone fragments rose into the air. The young man put a knife in front of him and rushed to attack. Thanks to his lightning-fast strikes, the monster's body was covered with wounds from the knife. The main character rushed forward decisively, his knife covered in purple energy. Raising his fist, the monster declared that his opponent was only capable of tricks. Declaring that there was not even a scratch left on him, the monster aimed his fist at the enemy. A bright flash appeared in front of him. A shockwave swept across the room. The player landed on the stone floor. The monster's fist stopped right in front of his face. The notification said that the Labyrinth Guard's level 10 frenzy time had expired. Looking at the immobilized enemy, Jin-hyuk stated that 5 minutes had passed. The Minotaur clenched his teeth in irritation. The demon with horns was shrouded in flames. Frenzy was capable of exerting its maximum strength in 5 minutes, but after that there would be a penalty where the user would fall into a state of suspended animation for 24 hours. A corresponding notification popped up warning of a penalty. The Minotaur fell to the ground, causing a status window. The guy said that he had 50 breach stat points, which could reduce the difference of 19 levels. Smiling, he thought that over the next few days he would reach 100 points. Pakana looked out from behind the stone, asking if the battle was over. The player replied that the rage was over, but they managed to get rid of the monster only for a while. Hearing that the monster would appear again if the labyrinth changed and a day passed, the girl opened her mouth in horror. Sticking 2 fingers forward, the young man declared that there were still 20 days left. 20 days later, the stone floor of the dungeon was destroyed. The Minotaur raised his axe over his head. The young man easily dodged a sharp cutting blow from the right. The notification reported an increase in the breach stat. Jumping up, he avoided the lower blow. A notification appeared saying that the number of breach stats received was equal to 100. Furiously opening its fanged mouth, the monster rushed to attack. The enemy's fist slammed into his chin, the Minotaur becoming weaker with each point he gained. Throwing the enemy back, the young man said that it was all because of his mood. His foot pinned the bull's horn to the floor. Towering over the defeated monster, the main character declared that the time had come for them to part. Smiling, he looked back. Looking at Pakana, Jinhuk said that he needed to decide how to deal with her. The girl, pressing her hand to her chest, asked what it meant to deal with her. Hearing that from now on the player was gathering interns into the company of old men, Pakana opened her mouth in surprise. Squinting, the guy asked if she really wasn't interested. Knitting her eyebrows, the girl shouted that she was very interested in such an offer because she had long wanted to join something like this. The player praised her for her determination. Approaching her, he asked to tell her how the girl could be useful for the company in the future. Putting her hand to her chest, Pakana replied that her personal contact ability would definitely be useful in managing the company. Thinking that he had already mastered this ability, the guy raised his eyebrows questioningly. The girl replied that she would never betray him. Taking a step forward, the young man asked what other proposals there would be. Hovering over his ally, he called her a complete disappointment. Hearing that the main character was ready to make a verdict, Pakana began to cry, begging him to give her more time. Smiling evilly, the player stated that there were no interns who had joined the company of old men. Raising her eyebrows in fear, the girl shouted that she would give him Braham's ring. Clutching his leg, she asked for her life and stated that her older brother had made a deal with China and provided ginseng to Koryo as payment. Looking at her from under his brows, Jinhyuk wondered how Braham's ring could have fallen into the hands of the Black Crow Guild. In the center of the golden ring, a red gem sparkled. It was one of the best items that can be obtained on the first floor. The ring increased movement speed, resistance to magic, and allowed it to restrain the mana of monsters. The guy's eye sparkled. Thanks to the Eye of Truth, it became clear that the girl's words were true. The corresponding notifications reported this. Putting his hand on her shoulder, the player congratulated her on gaining the status of an intern in the company of old men. Holding out 3 fingers in front of him, he said that the interns were not paid and that the interns should arrive whenever and wherever they were called. Hearing that the contract remained to be signed, Pakana widened her eyes in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about. The notification announced the reading of the memories of the world, and the powers of the contact and fire element skills appeared in the guy's hands. A plus sign appeared between the skill icons. A notification indicated that the merging of 2 skills had begun. A ball of blue energy appeared in the player's hand. He stated that it would be a little hot. The notification said that the soul brand skill had been obtained. The young man put his hand on the girl's shoulder. She asked in fear if this was really a contract. Raising his hand over her, shrouded in energy, the protagonist asked if Pakana really thought that she would just need to put a stamp on a piece of paper. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. The player congratulated her on joining the Black Enterprise. The notice stated that the soul brand was carved on the intern's face, and a woman's scream was heard in the depths of the labyrinth. An icon for the soul brand skill appeared. The description said that the object on which the mark was placed was obliged to obey the orders of the owner of the skill. If the rules were violated, the object's body would ignite. The gates of the labyrinth opened. The notice said that the first floor maze had been completed for the first time. The girl fell on the grass, rejoicing that she managed to survive. The notification said that players would be on the honor list for 1 day and would receive 5,000 coins. Looking at the notification, Pakana was surprised by such a reward for all the torment. Hearing the young man calling her, she looked back. Putting his hand in front of her, the main character ordered to give all the money. The coins flew into his status window. Now he had more than 10,000 coins, and there was most likely no player with more money yet. Pointing his finger at the intern, Jinhuk ordered Braham's ring to be brought within 3 days. The girl objected, saying that 3 days was too little. Gathering blue energy in his hand, the guy stated that the time had been reduced to 2 days. A burn in the shape of a human palm appeared on Pakana's face, and she promised to bring the ring. The news was broadcast on a huge screen on the roof of the building. A man in an official suit announced that in a week, the strongest guild in Korea, Tangun, plans to defeat the boss of the third floor. Emblems of different guilds appeared. The Tangun Guild was the leading guild of the country, raising its stakes in the international competition to conquer the tower. The characters walked down the street past the screen. The news anchor asked if there were any statements from the Chinese. Knitting his eyebrows in confusion, the man said that it was better to try to capture the tower on his own rather than wait for help from another country because the Tangun Guild was able to cope without outside support. Watching what was happening on the screen, the player wondered if these people would regret their decision to go after the boss of the third floor. Imagining the tower, he realized that they were in such a hurry because they wanted to get as many resources as possible. Presenting the map of the tower, the young man decided that there was no need to go to the third or even the second floor because only 90 days were given to each floor. A message appeared about moving to the next level. Many monsters appeared in front of the player. In his opinion, the guild would not be able to cope with completing the floor due to the constantly increasing level of difficulty, and humanity would not have a second chance. The light was on in the window of the apartment building. The main character decided to begin by collecting all the information about the events of the last month. There were bags of garbage in front of the front door. Holding the phone in his hands, Jin-hyuk wanted to turn to informants whose information could be trusted in order to find reliable information among the gossip. A tab called Community Challenge Towers appeared on the phone screen. The site had a user search function. The main character was sitting at a table in a cafe. A guy with blonde hair introduced himself as Teeman and said his nickname was Bald Head. His strangely dressed avatar was holding a Molotov cocktail in his hand. The girl with black hair hit her chest and introduced herself as Yanghwa. Her nickname was Firefist, and her avatar was a children's inflatable ring and boxing gloves. Jin-hyuk opened his mouth in surprise, thinking that these guys with whom he played together 2 years ago were not at all similar to their characters. Imagining himself surrounded by avatars of his old friends, the guy thought that this was not how the first group should have been created. The notification announced the use of the Eye of Truth skill. Teeman smiled. All the information was displayed in his status window, including personal skills. The Machine King's ability icon appeared. This magic was quite powerful and had no serious drawbacks, so it was useful in large-scale battles. Yeonhwa took a sip from her plastic cup, her status window describing her stats and abilities. A sign of the Taekwondo Master skill appeared, which helped fight in close combat. The main character realized that the guys were hunting together because they had the same level. He smiled, thinking that they got along well before. The notification that popped up said that the player would only be able to copy abilities if they reached the 20th floor together. Pointing his hand at his ally, Teeman said that it was his turn. Distracted from his thoughts, the young man introduced himself, saying his name. Putting his hand to his mouth in embarrassment, he added that his nickname was Captain Boar, and thought to himself that he created this nickname 11 years ago. Sitting down at the table, Jin-hyuk said that he was 27 years old and that he streamed Paprika TV. Teeman's mouth opened in surprise. He was surprised that his friend was a streamer and said that he also sometimes watched Paprika. Smiling, the player replied that he had already stopped streaming. With a wave of his hand, the interlocutor said that they could relax because they had been playing together for many years. Yanghwa, sitting next to him, agreed with him. The thought flashed through the guy's head that his friends were too sociable. He remembered the smiling Jongsu who wanted to use him. An image of Pak Hana with burning eyes, who was about to betray him, appeared in his head. Sitting at the table with his old comrades, the young man thought that for the first time he felt comfortable after communicating with many hypocrites. In front of the hologram of the earth there was a chessboard. From his friends the player managed to learn what happened while he was in the labyrinth, for example, how the main guilds of the world developed. He also learned about streaming trends. The man opened a window in front of him to record videos. People in robes hid their faces behind black masks. The main character learned about the appearance of a group of miners who created a certain factory and were engaged in kidnapping people. Teeman raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked if his friend had really been missing for the last month. Hearing an affirmative answer, the young man clarified whether his friend had taken the test. After scooping ice cream into a spoon, the main character asked what kind of dough we were talking about. There was a taxi and a traffic jam on the highway. Looking back from the front seat, Teeman explained that a stream of players poured into the tower when it first appeared, but from the second floor the number of deaths increased. The tower rushed high into the sky. The association set a restriction due to which only those who passed the test could climb to the second floor. Pointing to the barcode on her wrist, Yanghwa added that the association issues a verification code to everyone. Remembering the face of the head of the association, Jin-hyuk thought that Sanjin was gathering people with powerful abilities under the guise of reducing the number of casualties. Smirking slyly, he decided to use the system created by the association for his own benefit. There was a screen with the earth depicted on it hanging on the skyscraper, and the taxi stopped at the entrance to the building. The symbol of the association appeared. After its creation, players who received a grade below F lost the opportunity to go to the second floor, and the dossier was stamped failed. People cheered as they stood in front of the man with the sword. Players with high scores immediately began to receive offers from the top guilds in the country, so 3 types of people gathered at the testing site. The first were those who desperately wanted to get the right to enter the tower. The guy clasped his hands, hoping to get a good rank. The girl bit her thumb, expecting to get at least E rank. The second were those who met players with high ranks, reporters prepared to do the interview, wondering which guild would take the A-rank player this time and wanting to do a special report. The man with the camera noticed something in front of him. The journalists opened their mouths in surprise. The third were those who wanted to show their right to enter to the whole world. Pakana from the Black Crow Guild and her brother Hajin, a rising star of the guild, passed along the road. A man walked behind them, camera flashes shining right in his face. Gait from the guild father of wrestling sternly knitted his eyebrows. The journalist asked the cameraman not to miss a single frame. Taking off his sunglasses, the man asked where the crowd came from. Hajin looked at him and explained that many people want to get rich quickly or gain fame. Frowning with displeasure, the man said that he did not have time and asked the guy to clear the way because reporters were waiting for him. His eyes lit up. Guide said that he came here for the sake of the young guys from Black Crow, so they need to try. Raising her eyebrows tensely, Pakana asked him not to worry and promised to do everything necessary. Hajin agreed with his sister. Security guards began to push the crowd aside to make way for the celebrities. Among the crowd stood the main character along with his friends. The guard pointed his finger at him and ordered him to get out of the way. Pointing to himself, Jinhyuk asked why he needed to move if he had his number and was waiting in line. Hajin pushed the guard away, accusing him of not doing his job well. Pointing a finger at the guy, the Black Crow Guild member said that he was making a big mistake by not moving. Hearing a voice from the crowd that said that he was opposing Hajin himself, the player realized that it was his trainee's brother, but did not even move, putting his hands in his pockets. Due to the use of the Eye of Truth skill, his eyes lit up. Hajin looked at him blankly and asked why the young man was staring at him. All the characteristics were displayed in his status window. The notification said that in order to copy his personal ability, the player needed to raise the target's interest to the maximum, and to copy one of the skills it was necessary to raise hostility to the maximum. With his eyes widened, the guy realized that he could provoke the copy target to gain his skill. While Hajin was trying to prove his point, Pakana approached them. Seeing her boss, the girl opened her mouth in fear. Her brother turned around, explaining that the man didn't want to leave. The main character grabbed him by the index finger. The next moment the finger was broken. Hajin immediately grabbed his swollen red finger, whining in pain. Jinhyuk calmly drank the water, not worrying about anything. Hajin's eyes lit up and he removed his hand, which was immediately enveloped in strong magic. All the people around were in shock. They called for everyone to run to the scene of the clash and look at what was happening. Janek, noticing something was wrong, looked at his opponent in surprise. At that same second, he grabbed the open bottle of water tighter. Hajin was already heading towards the main character when suddenly water got into his face and eyes. He threw a strong slash, but Jinhyuk was no longer there. All that was left was the bottle, which flew towards the attacker, when suddenly he received a strong blow to his leg, causing his stance to buckle. Within a second, Hajin fell to the floor with a loud cry, holding his knee. Not far from him, with his back turned, stood the main character. Everyone around was in shock. No one understood what happened. Among the uncomprehending crowd was Hana. She looked at Jinhyuk in horror. Drops of sweat were running down her face, and there was fear in her eyes. She asked herself why the main character was here. Quite suddenly it was heard from the crowd. It was Gait, who was holding his hands on his chest with displeasure. Jinhyuk looked at Gait emotionlessly. He immediately tried to use the level 1 Eye of Truth skill. At the same second, an error appeared with the inscription, failure. Immediately another error appeared, informing that the use of the skill was impossible due to the difference in levels. There was rage on Gait's face. Gritting his teeth in anger, he advanced on the main character. His eyes burned with a bright, warm flame. This guy's level was reported to be above 20. As soon as Gait approached the main character, he looked up at him and said that he didn't know that Hajin had a nanny. Then Gait calmly replied that this requires an eye and an eye, but nothing, Kajin is quite a useful fellow. Immediately Jinhyuk tensed. Frowning his brows, he asked if what Hajin supplied to China was ginseng from the Goryeo dynasty. Hearing this, Gait became furious, gritting his teeth and asking how he knew. All the people and reporters around heard this and did not understand what they were talking about. With his arms outstretched, Jinhyuk nonchalantly replied, "Does it matter how he found out?" and then asked if Gait would ask the right question. A malicious smile appeared on his face, and there was a certain idea in his eyes. For example, how to get rid of side effects, Jinhyuk suggested the question. Gait said rather sharply. A message immediately appeared informing that Gait was using the 3rd level dungeon skill. Walls began to appear around Jinhyuk and the enraged Giddy. Hyung, Teeman shouted, throwing himself into the closing walls. Veins appeared on Gait's forehead with anger, and fire burned in his eyes. It exuded strong magical energy. Jinhyuk, Yonghwa immediately shouted when she saw that the dungeon had closed. "Is this really a protective wall?" the main character asked in surprise, touching the impenetrable wall. Gait did not answer the question, but simply asked if Jinhyuk was really asking for 10 dungeons, after which he asked if then the main character could prove that he was not lying. Then Jinhyuk began to explain that the edible item needed to restore stamina and mana was ginseng from the Goryeo dynasty, after which he, imagining the exhausted magician, said that if you simply eat ginseng, a side effect will occur, magical poisoning. After that, he raised 3 fingers and said that the guys were probably suffering about this right now, but 3 objects could help with this. These were Carasian juice, moonstone, and most importantly, mandrake root, after which he said that he thought that the guys were now looking for the mandrake root. After thinking a little and throwing out his hand, he said that he would tell him where he was, after which he asked if Gait now believed him. Drops of sweat were running down Gait's face, and it was clear from his face that he was very excited. He said to himself that everything he said coincided with the words of the scouts and researchers. "Well, I agree," the main character asked with a malicious smile on his face. After thinking a little, Gait replied that he would believe Jinhyuk. But, he suddenly said, sharply holding out the knife that appeared in his hand. "I'm warning you, no tricks," Gait said in an angry and threatening voice, adding that otherwise it wouldn't seem like much. He clenched his teeth in anger and said to himself that the main character had asked for as many as 10 of the most valuable dungeons, and this was an excessively high fee. He held the blade shrouded in strong magic in front of Jinhyuk's face and said in his head that he needed to end everything here. Suddenly fear and shock appeared in his eyes. Jinhyuk smiled madly, his eyes glowing with a bright purple flame. Looking at his opponent, he said that it seemed that Gait had not yet understood. "Both our deal and your life," the main character continued to say. "In my hands," he added, raising the blade, which was shrouded in strong, terrifying magic. And at this time one of the guards broke through the floor. Jinhyuk's comrades were surrounded, but they successfully defended themselves. "Get away," Yenba shouted furiously, adding that unless, of course, they want to die. There was a raging fire in her eyes. Suddenly a notification appeared saying that the level 3 dungeon skill had been cancelled. The magic has dissipated. The guys went in different directions. The main character, with a smile on his face, shouted to Inui to calm down the girl. "Are you okay?" The guy's voice was immediately heard. They immediately ran up to him, shouting that he had been kidnapped just like that, and they would kill everyone, he said. Waving his hands, the main character said that everything was fine. Pointing to the departing Gait, Jinhyuk told them not to worry because he and Gait had found a common language. At that same second, Hajin rushed to the enraged Gait in a rage and asked if he would really just let the main character go. Bowing, Hajin, with a drop of sweat on his face, said that if he gave him a chance, he would come up with a good plan. At that same second, he received a strong blow to the neck from Gait. Raising him with one hand high above the ground, he told him to understand that Jinhyuk is stronger than everyone, after which he said that if Hajin does something like this again, he will greatly regret it. The guy was already out of breath, veins stood out on his neck, and saliva was flowing from his mouth. "I understand," Hajin said in a trembling voice and out of breath. Throwing the guy on the floor, Gait and his guys left. Hajin asked himself in horror what happened in that dungeon. A fire immediately lit up in his eyes. He was angrier than before. In his head he screamed that no one could humiliate him, which means he would kill him. It was immediately reported that by raising hostility to the maximum, you can copy one of the skills. A notification immediately appeared that the conditions were met, which means Jinhyuk copied the stealth skill. It was reported that stealth is a passive ability, difficulty in obtaining, description, breathing, and pulse can be controlled. The next message states that the copied skill is saved in the memories of the world. Jinhyuk, with a malicious and at the same time satisfied smile on his face, looked at the enraged Hajin. After that, he began to walk away while the people around him admired him. In the table rating, Hana was in first place with scores of 1,755. The main character said in surprise, folding his arms over his chest, "Did the trainee really drink mountain ginseng?" Suddenly a voice was heard inviting the next person into the office. With a blade in his hands, he entered the office and saw a crystal with a man standing next to it. He said that the test is simple, you need to hit the magic stone, objects, skills, you can use everything. The hidden power of the stone is revealed during the attack. The guy saw the blade in the hands of the main character and asked if he would really only use it. Jinhyuk immediately extended his hand with the blade in front of him and said that this would be enough. "Okay," the guy said, putting his hand to his chin and looking at something on the tablet, after which he added that the main character would start as soon as he was ready. Suddenly the guy noticed that the main character approached a stone larger than the one he was supposed to hit. He immediately turned to Jinhyuk, after which he said that the stone he approached was a mid-level stone, and pointed to the stone that was needed and told him to go to the entry-level stone. A flame flashed in the eyes of the main character. The guy was enveloped in the strong aura of the protagonist. He looked at Jinhyuk in horror and shock and said that ordinary players could not even activate a mid-level stone. The stone fell with a crash onto the floor, divided into two halves. The guy added that it was impossible to break the middle stone in half. The result of the main character immediately appeared on his tablet, showing that Jinhyuk's rank was as shocked by such results. The guy shouted that he needed to report this to his superiors. Jinhyuk suddenly said not so quickly. Taking the guy's tablet, he told him to report back in a week. Immediately the guy asked in confusion whether he was really asking to postpone the report. There was a terrifying power in Jinhyuk's eyes. He said that this was for personal reasons, and in a week the guy can report wherever he wants. But, the guy mumbled, not knowing what to say. Then the main character straightened up, took out a blade and, playing with it, said that he knew several worldly wisdoms. One of them, the law is far away, but the fist is nearby. In horror, the guy screamed that it was true. The door from the office opened. The main character, standing against the wall with his hands folded on his chest, asked Hana passing by, but they quickly overtook her. Suddenly the girl extended her hand to the main character, which contained a ring. It was Braham's ring. Difficulty of obtaining a magic resistance plus 10, movement speed plus 5%, ability suppression plus 20, description, suppresses the monster's magical abilities. Taking the ring in his hand, he turned around with a satisfied face and was about to leave. Hana immediately screamed, pointing to her face to remove the brand from her because she kept her promise. As he left, Jinhyuk waved his hand and said that he would look at her behavior. Why suddenly surprised voices were heard. These were his comrades. Teeman, with a drop of sweat on his face, asked in confusion whether the main character really had an F rank. Then Manhwa, in an equally confused voice, said that she thought that the main character would have a higher rank than them. It was day outside. The sun was shining. The voices of the protagonist's company were heard from the huge building. Jinhyuk replied that this was just a temporary result, after which he said that he needed to take a repeat test in a week. They left the building. A taxi immediately pulled up to the guys. Manhwa, walking to the car, said that the second test was in the dungeon, after which she asked the main character how it would pass. Jinhyuk, getting into the car, said that he needed information, after which he added that there was no need to worry about him because he would write later, and let the guys go to the tower. After sitting in the car and buckling down, the main character folded his arms across his chest and said to himself that the first test determines the rank based on magical power, and the one who passes this test moves on to the second. He introduced the huge monsters and orcs located in the dungeon, after which he said that the task was simple. He needed to go through one of the dungeons of the tower. There were no restrictions on difficulty. You could choose any opponents, even goblins or orcs. At the same moment, he imagined a completely different place. In the hall that he presented, a beautiful girl with beautiful wings was sitting. Jinhyuk said that the place where he would go is the ancient ruins on the first floor, after which he added that neither in the 11 years that they played the tower, nor now that it appeared in reality, no one was able to pass this forbidden zone. When was the last time I was here? He asked himself, finding himself in a new dungeon. He had a satisfied smile on his face and a huge backpack behind his back. They came to the abodes of the fallen, when suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a can of soda hitting him in the head. They immediately shouted at him to tell Jinhyuk to drag his suitcases. Mountain ruins, first floor of the Tower of Challenges. Warkug was very beautiful. Waterfalls flowed and rocks flew in the air. In his head, Jinhyuk said that with an F rank, he couldn't go there alone because the guild guarding these ruins wouldn't let him through. They marched forward in a huge expedition. He added that the best option was to go as a porter. Suddenly, one of the team turned to Jinhyuk and asked how he got here. The main character looked coldly at the questioner. He smiled and said that he needed a lot of money to survive. To this the stranger smiled back and said that everyone needs money. Suddenly, he showed a picture of his family on his phone and said that he was here to feed his wife and children. Jinhyuk's face changed at that very second. He immediately realized that this man was one of the suicide players. They moved further and further. The traveler said that both of them with rank F should be extremely careful. Where they point, that's where we go, because the equipment doesn't work inside and the ambulance won't come. Don't worry, the main character said with a confident and warm smile on his face, after which he added that those who are here will at least return home unharmed. Yes, the stranger asked, a little confused, turning to the main character. Cold sweat broke out on his face. The sky was blue. The sun illuminated the mountains and the earth. The stranger suddenly laughed and thanked Jinhyuk for his kind words, after which he praised him for being braver than the others. It was reported that the quest for the raid group was beginning. A scroll appeared indicating a raid. It was reported that this is a raid on the capture of ruins. Difficulty S, conditions, kill the boss of the location, free the prince who is deep in the ruins, reward, relic of your choice. We are there, it was heard from up front. Then everyone threw their huge backpacks onto the ground. The leader's voice said that everyone was doing well, so now they can rest while they wait for the raid group. Jinhyuk put down his backpack and looked at the huge temple in front of them. The golden chest was a special reward. The notification that appeared announced a special reward for the first conqueror of the tower. Special, the main character asked himself in surprise, looking at the notification that appeared in front of his face. Is it really only me who can see this? He asked himself. The next notice was about receiving the award. The hero now has stats for plus 10 points of luck and plus 10 points of adaptability. The next message said that the luck and adaptability stats had been increased by 10. Frozen was also obtained. The lock under the frozen emblem was opened. It has been reported that Cold Heart is the ability to remain calm even in a critical situation, but may have trouble showing emotions. It was also reported that the passive skill Monopolization was obtained. The lock under the Monopolization emblem was opened. It was reported that if Jinhyuk completed the quest alone, the reward for completing it would be the highest possible. This, the main character said in confusion. Suddenly a crazy smile appeared on his face, and madness was also visible in his eyes. He asked himself how cool this was. He put his hand to his mouth and thought. Jinhyuk presented several chests behind him with various rewards. He said to himself that even though there were an incredible number of awards in the tower, to receive at least one was great luck. With such passiveness, I don't even need luck, he joyfully said to himself. While he was thinking, a bright light suddenly shone in the center of the temple. It illuminated everything around. After a few seconds, barely visible figures appeared in it. It was a raiding party. One of the guys was loudly indignant, saying that he couldn't get used to teleportation, after which he asked what the others were doing. More soldiers appeared behind him. One of them reported that all 50 people were alive. Ordinary workers looked with some horror and distrust at the arriving raid group. It was immediately reported that the Eye of Truth of the first level was being used. We are moving forward, the leader shouted, adding that they will form the formation on the move. The raid group is in the vanguard. It was reported that this guy's name was Jeonghwan, age 29, level 14. Ability, Relief. Jinhyuk was informed that the condition for copying the ability was to gain Jeonghwan's trust during the raid. The main character's eyes exuded strong magical power. Damn, he said, biting his lip in worry. He looked at Jeonghwan, who was gathering a squad, and then said that gaining trust would be difficult. Wait a minute, he suddenly said. His eyes showed that he had something in mind. Jeonghwan didn't even realize that the main character was watching him so closely. In his head, Jinhyuk was asking himself if the guild leader of the top 10 was only at such a low level. He stood with his arms crossed and watched, saying in his head that he would not be noticed. Destroyed temple. There was devastation everywhere, nothing was whole. The roots of the trees have already sprouted everywhere. A mage from the squad, stopping in front of pitch darkness, turned to everyone and told everyone to follow her, because if someone gets lost, no one will save him. It was reported that the lamp skill of the first level is activated. The staff in the woman's hand glowed bright red. Strong magic was released from the staff, lighting up part of the corridor. The corpses and bones of other raiders and monsters appeared in it. Ordinary workers, going inside, were very frightened. Looking around, they asked if these were ruins. The guys walked past monsters that had long been killed by the raid group. Well, there was a massacre here, said a passing worker. They walked further and further. Looking around, they said that the atmosphere here was very scary. Suddenly Jeonghwan and his troops discovered what they had come for, after which he called all the workers to come to them. There was no positive emotion on Jinhyuk's face. He looked at the squad leader with contempt. It's strange, the main character said in his head, asking afterwards if there really were any losses, although they endured so many monsters. Remembering how Jeonghwan had just recently shouted about formation on the move, he said that that guy's strategy seemed rather strange. Suddenly, the main character's thoughts were interrupted by a strong blow on the shoulder from another porter, who angrily told Jinhyuk to go and distribute water. Then the main character remembered that he was just a porter. He smiled evilly, and veins stood out on his face. The man who hit him on the shoulder pointed his finger in the other direction, saying that here they could handle it themselves, telling the main character to help the foreigners. Foreigners, the main character asked himself in surprise in his head, looking at the guys in gold-colored armor, when suddenly he saw a strange sign on the shoulder of one of them. After thinking a little, he remembered that these were warriors of the Sion Guild. Suddenly he saw one of the soldiers in white robes and armor, which was unlike the others. Jinhyuk smiled mockingly, saying in his head that they were such fragile creatures, and then asked himself if it was worth making friends with someone. After a while, he handed over a mug of cold water. The knight in white robes looked at the main character in surprise. Jinhyuk said that the knight did a good job. The warrior thanked him. It was reported that level 1 communication was being activated. Jin-hyuk smiled contentedly when he learned about this. It was immediately reported that there was little interest in him. Suddenly the knight began to take off his helmet. Taking it off completely, it was a beautiful girl with brown hair. What Jin-hyuk saw shocked him. He understood everything immediately. She was the youngest daughter of the Laurentia family of aristocrats from Europe. She is a versatile player associated with divine power, with offensive, defensive, and healing skills. The girl looked incredibly heroic. She held the sword confidently in her hands. Jin-hyuk continued talking in his head. She, the hero who saved Amsterdam from chaos, is one of the most famous players in Europe. She is the Saint of Amsterdam, Teresa de Laurentia. Looking at how Teresa greedily drank all the water from the glass, he said in his head that it was now clear why there were no losses, adding that Teresa showed herself best in battles with the undead and other evil spirits. But, he suddenly said, after which his eyes glowed with a bright flame. He added that many want to go higher, and Teresa is here, although there is now a raid on the boss of the 3rd floor. It was reported that the level 1 Eye of Truth was being used. The girl, holding an empty mug in her hand, blushed because she was refreshed. Suddenly an error appeared saying that using the skill was impossible due to the difference in levels. Is she really higher than the 20th level? The main character asked himself in surprise. Suddenly, another message appeared on top of the error, informing that the luck and adaptability stats compensated for the difference in levels. The Eye of Truth of the 2nd level was immediately used. Cool, Jin-hyuk shouted joyfully in his head. It was reported that the main character can view the status of the target. Looking at the system screen in front of him, he said with a satisfied smile on his face that now he could appreciate everything. After looking at the girl's stats, he saw that her age was 22, level 29, and her special ability was the protection of heaven. Teresa was incredibly beautiful. There was no anger or greed in her blue eyes, only love and kindness. The conditions for copying were that Teresa is one of the top 100 players in the world, and if the main character rescues her from a dangerous situation, he will be able to copy one of the abilities or skills. Well, numbers, Jin-hyuk said in shock, looking at her characteristics on the system screen, after which he added that now it's clear why everyone admires Teresa. Suddenly, at one of the points, he noticed a quest to choose a profession. It was then that he understood why the girl went to these ruins. At that same second, Teresa, with a wide and kind smile on her face, handed the empty mug to the main character and, thanking him, said that she had quenched her thirst. Taking the empty mug, Jin-hyuk smiled kindly and said to himself that it was he who needed to thank her. Ability, which is highly valued by warriors, Jin-hyuk continued to say to himself. He understood that now he had a chance to receive the patronage of heaven. Jin-hyuk only had to find out what situation could be dangerous for this paladin and how he could save it. Suddenly the temple began to shake violently and collapse. The warriors called for their leader. He ran as fast as he could towards the soldiers. He was terrified, there was fear and bewilderment in his eyes. What he saw left him speechless. Trouble, said one of the soldiers. Sentinels, he said slowly. Already dead? The girl continued, sitting next to the corpse of one of the guys on their team. Further down the corridor there were more corpses. Ruin guardians were reported to be keeping an eye out for trespassers. A huge mechanism flying in the air looked at the entire raid squad. Remaining time is 10 minutes. Unknown cubes, shrouded in strong magic, began to appear around the guard. It has been reported that the ruin's security system sleeping bomb activates when intruders appear and summons guards when activated. In his head, the main character said that if you don't touch her, nothing will happen. At this moment, Chongwon grabbed his head in horror and panic, shouting to the entire audience who turned on this monster. It's late, only 10 minutes left, Jin-hyuk said to himself. Veins appeared on Youngwon's face. The leader's face was illuminated by the light from the guard. There was fear and the reflection of a monster in his eyes. In his head, Jeongwon said that fighting the guards with their strength would be suicide, adding that at least half, even more, would die. After that, he began to wonder what if they evacuated the civilians in 10 minutes. It's impossible, Jeongwon suddenly thought. This word seemed to be endowed with magic that forbade him to make the right decision. There was madness in the leader's head. He screamed to himself that he couldn't stop even before he started, adding that he worked so hard to become the head of the guild, so he couldn't stop now. We continue the raid, Chongwon said firmly. The terrified soldiers ran up to the commander, saying that they had not even gone halfway, so the guards would attack from all sides. Drops of cold sweat ran down Youngwon's face. Gritting his teeth, he ordered the soldiers to shut up and follow him, adding that he would take responsibility for everything. Even without a second team there is a chance for success, he said. Pointing to Teresa, he said that they had her. At this time, one of the soldiers ran up to a gathering of guys resting nearby and told them that the guards had woken up. One of the vacationers indifferently said that the one who reported about everything was worried, explaining that such a huge guild as Parhi would not act without countermeasures. True, the informer asked in surprise. Of course, the archer said, jumping up from his seat, adding that loners like them just need to obey the head, after which he said that most likely, the guild had probably already destroyed all the guards. Suddenly, a huge hand appeared behind him. A second later, the archer was turned into a bloody mess. The remaining frightened guys stood in a circle, preparing to defend themselves. We are in a very bad situation, the informer realized. Huge magical armor appeared around the guys, the main forces of the raid group. We are preparing for battle, Chongwon shouted, after which he added that the tanks are forward and the bearers are back. Quickly, he shouted, ordering the porters to distribute buffs to the tanks and the healers to get ready. People immediately began to rush from side to side, following the commander's orders. Taking a stance and raising his shield in front of him, he suddenly began to glow. It was reported that Youngwon would activate level 3 steel defense. It was also reported that Jeongwon had activated level 2 combat concentration. Tanks began to gather next to him, on which buffs began to take effect. The mage behind them took off, a magic circle appeared below her, and the staff she raised above her began to glow. It was reported that this girl had activated the second level angel song. The stats of all warriors have increased. They're getting closer, Youngwon shouted, ordering everyone to stay in formation. At that same second, huge armor jumped onto the line. A blow from a huge axe struck the commander's shield. He was able to contain it. Then the guard stood up. Leader, it was suddenly heard from far away. It was those three guys resting to the side. They were very exhausted defending themselves from the guards. The informer shouted, asking for reinforcements because they could no longer cope. The mage girl pointed at the guys, saying that they needed to help the solo players. At that same second, Youngwon ordered the girl to shut up and concentrate on the battle. The commander understood that in any case there would be casualties. Beads of sweat ran down his face. There was rage in his eyes, and his teeth were clenched from tension. In his head he was screaming that there was no time to think about solo players. The solo players were very scared. They held on with all their strength. Jeongwon explained that, unlike guild players who act coherently, solo players are immediately lost in such battles. They heard it, but, said one of the solo players, lowering his head in disappointment. He realized that they had been abandoned. Tears flowed from his eyes. He screamed, begging for help. Suddenly, quick steps were heard. Teresa soared above the guards, swinging a sword shrouded in powerful magic. It was reported that the 4th level cross skill was activated. There was a warm flash from the ceiling. At that same second, all the guards were struck by Teresa's strong, well-aimed and quick blows. The girl's eyes burned with a bright blue fire. The desperate guy suddenly saw the light. Teresa, he shouted joyfully, looking at his savior. A bead of sweat ran down Teresa's face. There was composure and calm in her eyes. In her head, she analyzed that 2 guards had passed through the raid team's positions. The non-combat units were in danger. She immediately rushed to the defense of the soldiers. Teresa understood that she needed to hurry up and cover the rear. In the rearguard, there was devastation in the hall. Many of the porters were dead. One of the workers was sitting on the floor, saying that they were in trouble. Blood was pouring from his mouth. One of the guards swung a huge axe at him. Suddenly, cuts ran down the guard's arms and legs. "What are you talking about, uncle?" The voice of the main character was heard. At that same second, the guard fell apart into many pieces, out of action. In front of the man, who was already ready to die, stood Jin-hyuk, who, with a smile on his face and a blade in his hand, said that he had already said that he would return home alive. Jin-hyuk, from behind, a man suddenly shouted. A huge hand of a guard was flying towards the main character from behind. Jin-hyuk avoided her without an iota of fear. It was reported that the level 1 fire element was being activated. At that same second, the protagonist's hand caught fire. He smiled madly and shouted, "What else?" Throwing his hand forward, a strong stream of fire was released from it, which was directed towards the hand. All that was left of her was fragments, although the fingers on her hand were twitching. Jin-hyuk, shaking off his hand, turned away and said that he would not finish off, let others do it, after which he said that he needed to remain at the 1st level so he could not kill. "Where did you get such strength?" asked the surviving man, holding his wounds. Scratching his head, Jin-hyuk smiled and said that he was just lucky. In his head, he wondered who woke up the high-level guards of the ruins, because there was no point. The old man looked at his savior in shock, in no hurry to get up. Suddenly, Teresa grabbed the man. A second later, he was already standing 10 meters away from the main character. Teresa stood with her back to the main character and said that she thought Jin-hyuk was a good person, but he turned out to be threatening the man with a knife. Suddenly, she said that perhaps it was he who woke up the guards. There was anger and contempt in her eyes. Turning to the main character and raising her shield, she said that Jin-hyuk was arrested. The main character was very confused when he heard the accusations. At the same second, a strong blow from a girl's sword flashed next to him. The main character barely managed to dodge. She turned to face Jin-hyuk, telling him not to move because she didn't want to hurt anyone. After thinking a little, the guy said that there was a misunderstanding. The girl again struck a strong blow, but missed. She shouted that she would listen to him later. In his head, the main character said that it seemed that Teresa was too angry and was not listening to him at all. He understood that he no longer had a choice. Teresa swung her shield at the protagonist again, wanting to deal a strong blow. She threw a strong punch, but missed again, so Jin-hyuk pushed with force. Teresa flew into the floor with enormous force, breaking a crater. There were stones on her face. She lay exhausted in the hole, holding back the pain. Jin-hyuk put a blade to the girl's face, saying that he would not be a guard. Teresa looked in horror at the main character, whose eyes glowed with a bright blue light, and there was calmness and composure on his face. Jin-hyuk said that if he had to, he would kill with his own hands. Mrs. Teresa, Mr. Jin-hyuk, the rescued man suddenly started screaming. With his arms outstretched, he ran up to the enemies and shouted that Jin-hyuk had saved him. Hearing this, Teresa was speechless. After a while, the man left, and non-stop apologies were heard in the hall. The girl bowed to the main character, apologizing. Jin-hyuk asked her to stop, saying that his actions really seemed suspicious. He began to leave, and Teresa followed him, asking why the main character was hiding his identity. For what reason, Jin-hyuk wondered, calmly walking forward. The same as you, he answered after thinking. After that, he said that Teresa invited the Sion Guild as a cover, after which he added that the girl wanted to secretly obtain the contract of St. Peter for the quest to choose a profession. After thinking a little, he admitted that he also needed one item, the receipt of which no one should know. Teresa was shocked by what she just heard. Drops of cold sweat ran down her face. She asked herself in her head how the main character knew about everything. Jin-hyuk smiled and said that he knows all the strategies for passing these ruins, so Teresa will help him with her skills, and the items they need are in one place. Turning to the girl, he asked with warmth in his voice if she would join forces with him. Teresa looked at the main character in confusion, wondering what to answer. The guards were defeated. In the crowd of vacationers, the commander shouted, saying that it was impossible. Throwing his arms forward, he furiously shouted that they should move forward in coordination, and then asked if they really wanted to go alone. Teresa, standing in front of him with her hand to her chest, explained that according to their map there were only 20 kilometers left. The strategy was known to everyone. Nothing would change if it didn't exist, after which she said that, in addition, according to the agreement before the battle with Boss, all squad leaders have the same rights. Hearing this, Youngwon broke out in a cold sweat and didn't know what to answer. Teresa stood silently opposite him, waiting for an answer. Exhaling heavily, he hit himself on the forehead and allowed the girl to separate from the group, after which he said that she should return before they reached the boss's room. Joyful Teresa, clasping her hands, said that she would join them before the battle began. Remembering something, she asked to take one porter with her. Then Youngwon began to walk away, waving the girl away, telling her to do whatever she wanted. Hearing this, happiness and joy appeared in Teresa's eyes. "This is a one-way ticket," the voice of the workers was heard. The porters stood in a huge crowd, praying that they would not be chosen to march with Teresa. Suddenly the main character raised his hand. Coming out of the crowd, he said with a serious face that he was ready to go. Immediately all the workers threw themselves on his shoulders, begging the guy not to follow the lead of youth and to stay with everyone. In his head, Jin-hyuk said that no matter what he said, the workers still wouldn't understand. "Uncle," he said suddenly. The main character stopped. A strong, terrifying aura emanated from him. In his head, he asked if it had ever happened to him that when he was young, he was struck by an idea. The porters immediately released the guy, not understanding what he was talking about. At that very second, Jin-hyuk turned to the workers and, clutching his heart, shouted that love was burning inside him now, even if he lost his life because of his weakness. Hearing this, everyone present was shocked. Jin-hyuk and Teresa started to leave. The porters looked at the guy, saying that he was such a romantic. Exhaling heavily, the main character said that he was tired. Next to him walked Teresa, looking at the main character. After a while they came out into a hall full of monsters. They walked to the edge of the platform and looked down. Teresa pointed to the crypt, surrounded by a magical barrier, and said that the Treaty of St. Peter was in that sarcophagus. "Yes, I noticed that too," Jin-hyuk answered immediately. Looking at the girl, he calmly asked her if she understood that she needed to remove the protection. "Yes, I know," she answered immediately. Suddenly a warning flashed in front of them. Teresa looked in shock at the system window in front of her, in which it was written that the master of the abode of the fallen was watching them. Reading the same thing on his screen, Jin-hyuk was calm, rubbing his chin. In his head he said that this was definitely about the boss, after which he thoughtfully said that the boss had never been interested in the players, and now he decided to show himself. Drops of cold sweat appeared on the girl's face. Pointing to the warning, she stammered and asked if the main character saw the same thing, after which she said that it was definitely from the boss, but what did these words mean? Did he really see us as enemies? Teresa asked in confusion and fear, to which Jinhyuk immediately replied that this was not so. Pointing his finger at himself, he said that the boss was a sign of him. The girl looked at her friend in shock and asked herself in her head where such confidence came from. Turning to Jinhyuk, Teresa decided to ask if he really knew the way through. Putting his hands in his pockets, the main character replied that he had known him for a long time. Then, the girl said slowly and shyly. Jinhyuk was unhappy waiting for his companion's question. Then what should I do? She asked, putting her hand to her chest. There was fear in her eyes, but she was still ready to do anything. There were many dangerous monsters walking below, protecting the grave. Suddenly, Teresa jumped from the balcony. She landed among the monsters. The monsters immediately paid attention to her. Teresa was reported to be activating a level 5 battle song. For 10 minutes, all stats increased threefold. There was a powerful and terrifying aura around the girl. Her eyes glowed with a bright blue light. She was ready for a fight. What happened a few minutes ago was that the main character said with a smile on his face that her task was simple, saying that Teresa must attract the attention of the undead. The monsters quickly rushed towards Teresa, who was already preparing to defend herself. She recalled the words of the main character, who said that if the girl released her divine energy, raising her hand with the sword, Teresa began to gather all her strength. Then all the attention will be only on you, the main character said in her memoirs. Suddenly she opened her eyes. They were filled with enormous power. The sword in her hands was shrouded in a strong aura. It was reported that the power of a level 5 saint was being activated. A few seconds later, a huge light was heard, illuminating everything around. Its source was Teresa herself. At that same second, all the monsters rushed at the girl. A glowing blade immediately appeared in front of the face of one of the monsters. She immediately cut it down and started working on the others. She handled everyone without much effort. An endless crowd of monsters ran towards Teresa, ready to kill everyone. Immediately, the main character's foot stepped on the head of one of the monsters. Jinhyuk jumped from head to head, realizing that all the undead were now directed at Teresa. He jumped further and further, moving towards the sarcophagus. In his head, he said that thanks to the control from his companion, he would not enter and increase his level. Suddenly, he felt incredibly strong and ominous magic. The huge sarcophagus exploded at that very second. A huge skeleton emerged from it, shrouded in strong and terrifying magic. It was reported that elite undead had appeared and special dead had risen. The floor was on fire, and the main character was covered with debris. A few seconds later, Jinhyuk stood up from the rubble. There was a satisfied smile on his face. In his head he said happily the mini-boss had finally appeared. At that same second, a huge guard sword appeared from behind a column of smoke. Noticing him in time, the main character deftly dodged without receiving damage. As he dodged the sword, he said in his head that Durahan shouldn't have been here or the conditions had changed because of Teresa. He immediately began to run away from the guards who surrounded him. A few seconds later, he jumped on the guard, starting to attack him, and at this time the lick used strong magic, destroying everything around him. The main character understood that it would be easy to deal with him. Then he added that you need to be careful with flying monsters. At that same second, the lick raised the staff in his hand above himself and began to accumulate enormous power in the weapon. After a few seconds, he pointed his staff at Jinhyuk, about to release strong magic at him. Black lightning bolts of black magic were released from the staff. Noticing them, the main character smiled contentedly and began to dodge. The lightning passed right next to his face, but without hitting him, it rushed towards the protective barrier of the crypt. Upon reaching it, the barrier cracked. In his head, Jinhyuk said that in general, such a defense would not be difficult to deal with. A few seconds later, the barrier shattered into pieces. It was reported that the 5th level magical defense had been destroyed. The lick didn't know what to do because he was the one who destroyed the barrier. Without wasting any time, Jinhyuk ran towards the lick. A blade appeared in his hand, shrouded in powerful, terrifying magic. And there was a crazy smile on his face. He ran through all the guards blocking his path, cutting them down. He looked with contempt and hatred at the severed parts of the guards. Looking at Teresa, who was constantly slashing at the monsters around her, he said that it looked like she would be done soon too. "There is only you left, skeleton," said the main character, looking at the lick, who, apparently, was confused. At that same second, with one powerful and sharp blow, he was cut into 2 parts. Surprised, Jinhyuk looked at what happened to the lick. "I finally found you," came the stranger's voice. A foot stepped on the monster's crushed skull. At that very second he was crushed with force. The one who reads all the movements of monsters like an open book was suddenly said by a stranger. It was a small guy with a sword in his hand. He said that he was sure that the main character would come here. "Long time no see," he said, extending his hand with the blade towards Jinhyuk. This guy's eyes glowed bright blue. "You," the main character answered in confusion, looking at the guy. Not recognizing the stranger, Jinhyuk shouted, asking who he was, to which the guy with the sword replied that the main character should remember him. When suddenly veins appeared on his face from anger, he angrily asked if he really didn't recognize him. "You don't recognize me?" the stranger shouted again, pointing his sword at the main character. The Eye of Truth has been reported to be used. Lightning oozed from the main character. It has been reported that stat effects compensate for the difference in levels. The player's status opens. The guy did not lower his sword, aimed at the main character. This guy's name was Yusung, age 28, level 29, ability Sword Song. It was reported that the copying conditions are such that Yusung believes that he is the best swordsman, so Jinhyuk needs to defeat him in a sword fight, breaking the guy's self-confidence. Looking at Yusung's sword, he recognized that the iron sword was from the Qianlong dynasty, when suddenly he remembered that this was the same item that had disappeared from the museum. He imagined Yusung stealing that sword and then said in his head, what if it was that guy? Afterwards, he remembered the times when Challenge Tower was a virtual game. That's when Yusung lost to him. It was after this defeat. The next moment when Yusung came to him was on a completely different floor where Jinhyuk defeated the next boss. Wherever he was, the main character said, Yusung challenged him again and again. This warrior is eager to fight. Pointing his finger at Yusung, the main character recognized him as that same stalker. The guy himself was very angry. Gritting his teeth, he angrily said that Jinhyuk didn't recognize him because the game became a reality, after which he asked if the main character really underestimated him that much. Putting his hand to his face, Jinhyuk tiredly asked if it was Yusung again, adding that he constantly challenges him to fight just to play. This time it will be different, Yusung said, holding the sword in front of him. He was very angry and said that they are both at the very beginning of their journey, so Jinhyuk has no advantage now. The main character turned away and coldly said, what if Yusung wants to fight, then he won't stop him, when he suddenly asked if he could handle it. At this time, his partner ran up to him from behind. Pointing his finger at her, Jinhyuk said that she wouldn't just stand by and watch. Teresa ran at all speeds to her comrade. Exhaling angrily, with hatred in his eyes, Yusung said that his opponent had an interesting partner, when suddenly he shouted that he would not allow anyone to interfere with them. Suddenly it was reported that Yusung was using the level 5 battlefield selection skill. Yusung's blade was shrouded in strong magical power. The guy pointed his blade at the floor. Hitting the floor with force, a huge blast wave was heard. The main character stood next to a broken grave with things. In the very corner there was a small glow, from which strong magic emanated. The space began to change. Teresa called out to her comrade, who was reaching into the grave for light. Jinhyuk took out a small ball from the sarcophagus. With a satisfied smile on his face, he looked at Teresa and said that they would meet again. Within a second, he and Yusung disappeared. They both found themselves in some kind of space. Raising his blade and taking a stance, Yusung shouted that now nothing would hinder them anymore, after which he challenged the main character to a fight. It was reported that Yusung would activate the 5th level duel. All of Yusung's stats increased by 10%. The main character just stood there, waiting for the fight to start. It was reported that all of his stats were reduced by 10%. Yusung advanced towards Jinhyuk. The main character himself looked at the approaching opponent and said to himself that Yusung's special skills, choosing the battlefield and the duel, had significantly weakened him. That is why the situation has become extremely unfavorable. It has also been reported that special conditions for the synthesis skill are activated. In the message that appeared, it was written that when the situation for copying is unfavorable, the conditions are adjusted in accordance with the changing situation. Copying conditions can be met after obtaining the skill. Stretching his hand out in front of him, he pointed his finger at his opponent. The main character was shrouded in strong magic. Suddenly he said that he was copying Yusung's unique ability. It has been reported that the unique ability Sword Song is being copied. Right there in the notification it was written, Song of the Sword, Jinhyuk's skills as a swordsman are enhanced by 200%. The body itself uses sword fighting techniques and also significantly enhances the player's perception. Behind Jinhyuk, the protagonist's strong skill began to be used. There was a smile on his face. It has been reported that the copied ability is retained in the memories of the world. You're ignoring me again, Yusung shouted furiously. He immediately ran towards his opponent, shouting at him not to relax. A blade appeared in Jinhan's hand. At that same second, a fierce battle began. Every blow was repelled. The main character struck. An enraged Yusung, parrying his opponent's blows, shouted, asking what he was counting on, adding why he was fighting at medium range, using only a dagger. Jinhyun had a sly smile on his face. Inflicting and repelling blows, Oo replied that it seemed to him that this was enough, because fighting with swords was also interesting. Hearing this, Yusung's rage awakened. He pulled his sword behind his back and shouted that Jinhyun was still underestimating him. After that, he pointed his sword at the main character. It was reported that Yusung would activate the 6th level Sword Soul skill. At that same second, waving his sword, which was filled with enormous strong magic, he sent a shockwave towards the enemy. Easily dodging, the main character asked if he was trying too hard, adding that Yusung was just using the highest techniques in a fight with a newcomer. Hearing this, Yusung sent his opponent away and shouted that Jinhan was no longer a beginner. It's a pity that the main character once said to himself, after which he rushed towards his opponent. He understood that if the enemy continued to parry the attacks, the dagger would come to an end. So it's time, he said. After these words, he took out the sphere that he had previously taken from the grave. For a skill that can withstand a sword, he added to the previous sentence. Immediately after this, he placed the ball on the blade of his blade. After that, he said that he was combining the sword song and the demon soul. Suddenly the ball disappeared, being absorbed into the blade. Synthesis was reported to be taking place. In the next window that appeared, it was written that the ability sword song and the item demon soul were combined. The light that appeared from the synthesis blinded everything around. Because of this, Yusung had to close his eyes. There was a fire in the eyes of the main character. The notification that appeared stated that Jinhan had received the unique ability Sword Graveyard. In the window that appeared, a description of the skill was written. All the owner's skills are enhanced by 500%, the body uses only the most effective sword techniques, perception is at maximum, one of the abilities required to obtain the title Demonic Swordsman. The glow faded, and then the main character extended his hand with the blade to the side. There was not an iota of fear on his face. It has been reported that the unique ability Sword Graveyard will be activated. It was immediately reported that the skill Knight of the Dark Moon of the first level was activated. A huge force spread through the protagonist's hand. In his head, he said that the ability so far produces barely a tenth of its total power. He understood that he did not have enough mana to control this power, so he needed to increase its supply as soon as possible. Yusung stopped. He didn't understand what was happening. A huge strong magical wave flew next to him. Cold beads of sweat ran down his face. He didn't dare move. In his head, Yusung only asked himself what kind of incredible power this was, after which he added that this is the most convenient battlefield for him. He tries not to fight at the distance familiar to his opponent in order to maximize favorable conditions. Yusung was furious, causing him to bite his lip and veins to appear on his forehead and cheek. He screamed to himself why he couldn't win. He remembered how many times he died in the game. And out of the game, he said. Yusung recalled how he collected many articles and photographs in the room in order to reach the main character. Because of his anger, he broke his virtual reality glasses. He kept saying that he did everything to defeat Jinhak. Throwing his head up and spreading his arms, he shouted, asking why he could not surpass the main character. "I will not put up with this," he shouted again, after which he sent many strong blows towards his opponent. Noticing them, Jinhak stood up. His eyes burned with a bright violet flame. Yusung's punches were right in front of his face. At that very second, he repelled them, cutting them with his blade. Did he really parry these attacks too? Yusung shouted in shock, looking at his opponent's results. Suddenly the main character appeared behind Yusung. With a malicious smile on his face, Jinhak said that he had already fought with someone who was much stronger and faster than Yusung, but now he was tired of it. Immediately after these words, he raised his blade, shrouded in terrifying magic, above his head. And within a second he struck a strong blow at Yusung, who managed to block it with his sword. Due to such strong pressure, he lost his balance and began to fall. His sword began to crack due to the enormous strength of the protagonist's blade. With a deft movement, Yusung's sword was knocked out of his owner's hands. Jinhyuk had a crazy smile on his face. The sword landed 10 meters from its owner and stuck into the floor. After lowering the blade, the main character said that it seemed like he had won again, after which he added that he didn't even remember how many times he had won against Yusung. "This is the 138th time," Yusung answered, standing on one knee and bowing his head. "Kill me?" he suddenly asked. Hearing this, Jinhyuk smiled contentedly. Suddenly he said that next time, it would be his 139th victory. Hearing this, Yusung was shocked. Waving his hand on his face, the main character told the defeated man that he himself knows that the Tower of Tests is no joke, because even the strongest players sometimes die here due to negligence. "But we need strong players," he added. After that, he extended his hand to Yusung and said that people as persistent as him are needed even more. Hearing this, the guy looked at the outstretched hand. A strong player, he asked himself. In his head, Jinhyuk said that he needed to wait 60 days to copy the player's abilities again. In reality, he smiled, looking at his opponent, but in his heart he laughed insidiously, saying that there was no need to waste energy on searching if there was an excellent target to copy. Yusung took the main character's hand, rising from his knees. It was reported that the first level communication ability is activated. Standing up, Yusung immediately turned around and began to leave, saying that he accepted defeat, after which he added that next time the outcome would be different. Hearing this, Jinhyuk laughed. He said that he would wait. It has been reported that the effect of the battlefield selection skill has been cancelled. The space began to break down. Before everything finally breaks down, Yusung said that he still doesn't know the main character's name. "Why do you need to know my name?" Jin-hyuk immediately asked. Pulling the sword out of the stone, he said that then he would call the main character as before. As before, the main character asked himself in surprise. Suddenly he understood. Beads of sweat appeared on his face. Throwing the sword over his shoulder, Yusung turned around and called the main character by his in-game name. Not only he heard this, but also Teresa, who was a little confused by this. A scream was heard in the dark room. Someone called out to Jiangwen. There was a system screen hanging in front of the hooded guy. He looked at the leader and asked if they hadn't killed all the monsters. Chongwen asked what he was talking about. The guy pointed his finger at the screen and said that the scanning artifact had lodged something, although there shouldn't have been anything left there. The red dot moved quickly. Youngwon realized that someone was moving in their direction. The squad members looked fearfully at something ahead. A monster in armor approached them. It was an iron golem. A man with long blonde hair sat on a golem. Youngwon frowned. From the stranger's appearance, he guessed that this was a high vampire. The man put his hands behind his back and went down to them. He bowed, greeted the guests, and said that his name was Baluz. The vampire smiled and said that he was accompanying the lord, the owner of these ruins, and also his blood relative. Chongwen pointed his sword at Baluz, opened his mouth and asked why he came, because it's unlikely that he just went out for a walk. The vampire looked with hostility at the swords pointed at him and said that he had a proposal to the leader of the group. He held out his finger to the blade and said that he was giving them a choice. The first option was to simply follow him without arguing. The vampire pressed the tip of the sword, blood flowing down his fingers. A scarlet stream fell to the floor. The system reported the activation of a bloody plague of an unknown level. Red streams of magical energy wrapped around people's bodies. Youngwon opened his mouth, sweat running down his face. Magical currents engulfed the bodies of his team members. They screamed, not understanding what was happening to their bodies. A dark human silhouette was inside a red cocoon. The guy opened his mouth and looked to the side in fear. Baluz raised his hand, smiled, and said that if the leader chooses the second option, then only half of the squad will go with him, and he will eat the rest. Magic sparks illuminated the stone object. Kneeling down, Teresa cast a spell. Jin-hyuk sat next to her. The system reported that the power of a level 5 saint was being used. The girl closed her eyes. The crystal hovered in front of her. The blue stone was decorated with silver patterns. The system window said that this is an icy tear, which, when absorbed, enhances magic, but if purification is not applied, it can seriously harm the player. The system reported this. That mana is increased by 12. The main character looked at his palms. He could not believe that he was able to get an icy tear, which is usually difficult to get, along with the Demon Soul Stone, and thanks to the holy power, Teresa had already received 12 stats. He gave the girl a thumbs up when she asked if everything worked out and said he was happy with the result. Her eyes widened in surprise as the system window appeared in front of her. A system for notifying that an invitation has been received from the owner of the monastery. In the system window it was said that if Teresa wants to save the members of her group, then she needs to go to the farthest room. The reward for this will be a meeting with the owner of the monastery. The system also notified that upon accepting the invitation, all monsters and traps will be deactivated. Her eyes glowed blue. A drop of sweat rolled down her face. She opened her mouth and said that the entire squad had been taken hostage. The girl could not believe that someone could kidnap an entire group. Jin-hyuk pursed his lips as he watched Teresa lower her head and say that she needed to act quickly to save anyone. She clenched her hand into a fist. Something was bothering her. Teresa imagined a woman with black wings and wondered if he could defeat the Lord. The girl imagined a dark figure with red eyes opposite her and thought that they might fall into a trap prepared for them. Teresa opened her mouth and said that without a raid group they could not defeat the Lord, and thought about whether the outcome could have been different if she had stayed with the squad. The girl imagined a multicolored symbol with a cross in the center and thought that she joined the party as a paladin simply because she wanted to protect other players. But perhaps she made the wrong choice. Yusung closed his eyes and sighed heavily. The guy leaned forward and said he would go because it had nothing to do with him. As he passed the girl, he said that he thought she was having a hard time making a decision, so he would like to give her some advice. Yusung looked displeased at the guy standing with his back to them and said that Jin-hyuk doesn't have a drop of honor. He's simply selfish and in general he hates him. The young man frowned, clenched his teeth, and said that he could only guarantee one thing. The main character smiled and crossed his arms over his chest. Yusung said that if anyone could defeat the Lord, it was only him. Teresa pursed her lips and looked ahead in confusion. The swordsman went further and said that he was leaving. The girl clenched her teeth. She smiled and thanked Yusung for the advice. Teresa clenched her hand into a fist and told Jin-hyuk that she was going to accept the invitation of the owner of the monastery. The main character put his hands on his hips, warned that his services were expensive, and asked if she was sure that she could do it. The girl continued to clench her fingers into a fist, opened her mouth and said with determination that she was ready to pay as much as necessary for his help. Jin-hyuk smiled and thought that she would go there anyway. He slammed his fist against hers and said he agreed. The system reported that 2 players accepted the quest. The system window said that the monsters were hibernating. They approached the steps that led to huge doors. A drop of sweat rolled down Teresa's face. He thought that there were some unreal volumes of mana here. She opened her mouth and looked fearfully at the main character, who said that she did not need to be afraid because now they had an idea of the enemy's strength. Jin-hyuk put his hand in his pants pocket and said that in battle the strongest does not always win. Teresa assumed that he had a plan. The guy clenched his teeth, bowed his head and answered that he did. The doors began to open, revealing a red glow behind them. The girl pressed her hand to her chest. The shadow of the doors fell on her. Jin-hyuk said that no matter what happens, she must trust him and believe in him. They found themselves in a room with red flags, red carpeted steps leading to the throne. The main character and Teresa walked forward. Baluz narrowed his eyes slyly and pursed his lips. It was difficult for him to hide his glee. Jin-hyuk walked a little ahead of the girl. Someone said that they had finally arrived. On the throne sat a girl with silver hair. This was the Lord, also known as Alice von Ataraxia. She pressed her hand to her face, turned her head and said that she was tired of waiting for them. The main character calmly looked forward and asked if people were safe. The Lord snapped her fingers and invited him to see for himself. The system reported that a measurement gap was being applied. Tied up people appeared in front of Jin-hyuk. The guy's eyes turned yellow and sweat rolled down Teresa's face. The dark-haired man's eyes and mouth were covered with black cloth. The main character recognized him as Hajin. The young man's eyes lit up when he suggested that Hajin had awakened the guards. 2 people froze in the middle of the red carpet. Lord said that she invited them here because of the smell that comes from Jin-hyuk. The woman crossed her legs and said it was the sweetest smell she had ever smelled. She smiled, put a finger to her lips and said that she liked the smell of his blood. The Lord stuck out her tongue and said that this sweet smell, which was incomparable to the smell of other people, excited her. The main character opened his mouth and looked at her with disgust. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The Lord smiled and said that she felt his anxiety. Jin-hyuk bowed his head, pressed his finger to his forehead and said that a person cannot be calm when a vampire talks about blood. The woman smiled and said that he had nothing to worry about. She eats delicious things very slowly, so he can live another 60 years. A drop of sweat rolled down the guy's face. He opened his mouth, thanked her for her concern, said that he did not want to live like an expensive dinner and thought that Lord's words meant that she wanted to insert a tube down his throat and keep him with her. A red beam appeared next to him. There was a hole in the carpet behind the main character. Blood was coming from a wound on his cheek. The vampire said that his opinion did not matter. She pointed her index finger at him and said he had no choice. Smoke was coming from a hole in the carpet. Jin-hyuk bowed his head and hid his hand behind his back. Teresa asked if he was okay with concern in her voice. The guy leaned forward, gritted his teeth and said he had something else to offer. The girl opened her mouth in surprise when the main character dropped to one knee and told Lord that he could give her something sweeter than blood. The vampire narrowed her eyes and left. She leaned forward, waved her hand, and said that for them there was nothing more important than blood, so that no matter what he offered her, her opinion would not change. The guy smiled and asked if she was sure of her words. He imagined lions with spikes and asked if she would refuse if he offered them freedom. The Scarlet Lord's eyes widened in surprise. The other vampires bared their teeth and growled, outraged by his words. Someone raised his hand to stop the angry crowd. The woman put her hand on her hip, opened her mouth and said that Jin-hyuk would regret it if he didn't back up his words with action. The guy lowered his head and said that he would not have come here if he was not ready to answer for his words. The Lord opened her mouth and allowed him to speak. The guy raised his hand, summoned some purple object and said his name. He brought the object to his face and said that he was the representative of the mains in the tower. The main character put on a mask with a purple symbol and vowed to free the Lord. 2 pairs of red eyes glowed on the red mask. Main were those who, because of money, revenge, or personal beliefs, renounced humanity. Jin-hyuk imagined a man next to the tower and thought that the mains were preventing the players from climbing the tower. The half-naked man threw his sword over his shoulder. The mains helped the monsters located in the labyrinths and ruins. The Lord pressed her finger to her chin, pursed her lips, and said that she had heard of the Mana, but she doubted that the guy was one of them. The main character in a black mask raised his head and said that he had established a connection with the temple on the 27th floor. He imagined a low building among the mountains and a red dome with a strange symbol and said that there they told him how to deceive the barrier that covered the ruins. Teresa looked at the guy's back in confusion, thinking about what it all meant and why he said that he was Main. The vampires in black hoods were heatedly discussing something. The girl did not understand why everyone was excited when they found out about the temple. The main character bowed when the Lord said that since he knew about the temple, it was not a bluff, but she was not ready to believe him. Red splashes of blood rose at her feet. She said that she didn't care whether he was main or not, but the vampires had been locked in this place for centuries, so it was all just idle chatter. Scarlet streams similar to blood changed shape. Lord said that she did not like talkers. A lot of weapons appeared behind the vampire. She said that she did not believe the talkers. The system reported that the bloody sphere was activating. The woman narrowed her eyes and said that she was sorry that everything had turned out this way because his blood smelled so delicious. The Lord waved her hand and the weapon flew forward. She wished Jinhyuk death. Red sharp objects were approaching the guy. Teresa covered him with herself and her shield. A hexagon appeared, in the center of which there was a cross. The system notified that the power of the saint was activated. The huge cross shone brightly, surrounded by smaller crosses. The weapon collided with the golden protective dome. The cloak behind Teresa developed. She told Jinhyuk not to go out. Sweat ran down the girl's face. She clenched her teeth and said that she hoped that divine power would cope with this attack. The system notified that the connected shield was activated. Many weapons hovered in front of the barrier. Teresa opened her mouth with effort, trying to hold the shield. The Lord closed her eyes, laughed and said that it was funny to see how hard a girl would work to counter a normal attack. Her smile became smaller. The vampire clenched her teeth and said that she greatly hated everything holy. The system notified that a bloody explosion had been activated. The Lord raised her hand. A red ball and a stream of energy appeared above her. She said that she would destroy them with one blow. Teresa raised her head. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek. She realized that she could not hold out for long. The girl smiled, remembering that Jinhyuk asked her to trust him and have faith in him. A black and purple blade whistled through the air. Teresa had a dagger sticking out of her chest. Tears flowed from her eyes and blood came from her mouth. The main character stood behind her. The girl looked at him in confusion and whispered his name. The Lord froze, thoughtfully watching what was happening. Blood sprayed. Teresa fell to the floor. Jinhyuk stood next to her with a dagger in his hands. He asked if the vampire would believe him if he could prove that his words were not a bluff. The main character looked at the woman standing near the throne. She said that she liked how he betrayed the comrade who protected him, but she needed more evidence. Teresa grabbed the hem of his trousers. With the last of her strength, the bleeding paladin raised her head and said that they promised to save the squad members. The guy in the mask was watching her. She asked if this was his plan. He raised his hand with the dagger and swung it. Blood spattered the shield. Jinhyuk tilted his head slightly. The Lord smiled contentedly. She opened her mouth wide, laughed, said that she was convinced that he was on her side and said that she would give him the opportunity to explain himself. The main character bowed. Something red flashed in his hand. He said that he had prepared a special spell that would allow her to overcome the barrier. A ring was clamped between his hands. The system window said that this was a Braham ring. Jinhyuk said that if you put the Lord's soul in the ring for a while, you can deceive the barrier. The woman in the black dress said that this was the first time she had heard of soul sealing. The main character continued to stand with his head bowed. He imagined his eyes glowing red and thought about the reason why he was giving up all the experience points. The guy imagined how many system windows appeared around him and thought that for the same reason he remained on the first level. He imagined how he jumped over a crowd of fighting monsters. He was holding back because of the skill of moving souls. The main character knelt down on one knee and extended his hand. This special skill could only be activated by a level 1 player. The system notified that Jinhyuk met the criteria. A purple hexagon appeared, inside of which there was a white ghost. The system reported the activation of the magic circle for moving souls. Glowing circles and symbols appeared around the guy. The system window stated that recharging would only occur after 365 days and that only one soul could be sealed at a time. The system sent a warning that the skill will only work after receiving the subject's consent. Jinhyuk spread his hands to the sides and told the Lord that in a minute this magic circle will disappear forever, but if she gives her consent, the spell will work. The blonde woman froze in indecision. The main character was waiting for her decision. The other vampires watched with their mouths open. They were surprised that this circle was using it in such a way. A blue beam touched Beluse's forehead. The Lord turned to him. The woman pursed her lips and, using a mental connection, said that it was difficult for her to trust this person and asked to kill him and destroy the circle if Jinhyuk did anything suspicious. Beluse closed his eyes, indicating that he understood the order. The Lord began to walk down the steps, thinking that although it was difficult for her to trust her life to this guy, she had been imprisoned for several thousand years, so if she didn't try now, she might never be able to get out of the dungeon. She stepped to the edge of the circle. The leader of the vampires pointed her finger at the main character and said that she was asking for the last time whether she could trust him. The main character bowed, extended his palm to her and said that if she trusted him, she would not regret it. Their fingers touched. The system notified that Jinhyuk had activated the first level communication skill and that the subject was slightly interested in the main character. The woman opened her mouth, said her full name and said that she allowed her soul to be moved. The ring with the red stone began to glow. The system reported that the soul of the Lord, known as Alice, is moving into the ring of Braham. Blue smoke enveloped the woman's body. Blue smoke rose above the ring with the red stone. The woman said it was quite cozy here. The main character picked up the ring from the floor and said that he was glad. He looked at the item in his hands and told Lord that this was now her new home. The system notified that the ability to protect heaven was activated. Teresa moved her hand. The armored paladin stood up, standing behind Jin-hyuk. His mask began to disappear. He turned his head and congratulated the girl on her return. There was a golden cross in the dark blue hexagon. In the system window it was said that the patronage of heaven allows one to return the deceased to life, but instant death did not allow this to be done, and it took 240 hours to recharge. The girl stood bent over and pressed her hand to her shoulder. She raised her head and smiled widely. Teresa lowered her head, keeping her hand on her shoulder. She smiled when the main character congratulated her on her return. Jin-hyuk, whose face was hidden by a purple glow, looked at the ring, from which indignant cries were heard, and thought that he no longer needed it. He put the artifact in his pants pocket. Jin-hyuk then took the purple sword, and Teresa said that she had a lot of questions, but it was better to ask them later. There were enemies in front of them, and Jin-hyuk said that now was not the right time or place. Baluz gritted his teeth, raised his hand and called Teresa and the main character stupid people. He raised his hands above his head and shouted loudly, asking if they thought they would live after betraying his master. The system reported that the 13th level blood wave was being activated. Streams of dark red energy appeared around Teresa and Jin-hyuk. The main character raised his burning hand, and the system notified that the 5th level fire element was being activated. The next second there was an explosion, causing wind. Jin-hyuk waved his weapon, looking at the fire that filled the space. Without looking at the girl, he told her about the team members. Teresa approached the tied-up warriors who were sitting on the floor. The system reported that the girl was using the 4th level cross. With a quick movement of her hand, she cut the ropes on the body of the black-haired youth. He looked at Teresa with a smile and asked her what was wrong with the vampires. While Jin-hyuk stood surrounded by enemies, the girl said that he was facing the vampires alone. Baluz tilted his head and asked with an angry expression how the man was able to reflect his magic. Jin-hyuk, holding the bright sword tightly in his hand, replied that the vampire's magic and his fire extinguished each other. His eyes began to emit a purple glow as he added that the vampires lost even when their mistress was imprisoned. An inscription appeared on the dark screen that Jin-hyuk was activating a unique ability called Sword Graveyard. The system then reported that Baluz was activating a level 9 dark martial art. The white-haired vampire gritted his teeth tightly and extended his hand in front of him, shouting that he would kill Jin-hyuk with his sword if he could not do it with magic. The vampires rushed forward as Baluz ordered them to break the ring and free their lord. Youngwon opened his mouth wide, saying Teresa's name. Then he furrowed his thin black eyebrows. The vampires fell to the floor. Jin-hyuk and Baluz stood opposite each other, and the black-haired youth asked who the main character was. The girl thought with a smile that Jin-hyuk didn't want to reveal his identity if he was still wearing a mask, and replied that they met completely by chance, so she doesn't know much about him. Bellis also fell to the floor and Jin-hyuk turned away from him. He approached Teresa, who said that she had died for the first time, and at the hands of an ally, the main character replied that they still managed. The girl lowered her head and agreed with these words with a smile. A tear rolled down her cheek. The mask on Jin-hyuk's face began to disappear and his eyes were now visible. Teresa closed her eyes and with a warm smile thanked the main character for keeping them all alive. The system reported that Jin-hyuk saved the life of the owner of a unique ability called Protection of Heaven. Then messages appeared on blue screens stating that the conditions had been met and that the main character had successfully copied this ability. The system reported saving. Then a notification appeared that the ability was being stored in the world's memories. A golden cross could be seen inside the pentagon. The system provided information about the Heaven's Favor ability. When Jin-hyuk asked why Teresa was crying, the girl punched him in the chest, saying that she didn't know. The girl remembered how the main character pressed the dark screen and asked if he knew that she would be resurrected, and Jin-hyuk silently turned away. There were red tapestries hanging in the room, and the main character said that he was glad that Teresa survived. He pulled back the red curtain and invited the girl to finally take the relics and leave. Youngwon put his hand on his chest and introduced himself with a smile, and then said that the rights to the relics obtained during this raid belonged to the guild. The main character, whose face was hidden behind a black mask, asked if the young man was asking for relics after he saved his life. Youngwon explained with a smile that they would pay for the relics with money or something else, so Jin-hyuk would not be left out. The protagonist frowned, thinking that after defeat, this leader was still acting overconfident. He then pointed his finger to the side, saying that the guild could take the relics. As Youngwon walked past him, Jin-hyuk warned them not to complain if the result didn't satisfy them. The young man stopped smiling and turned around in bewilderment. On the floor lay a fragment of Merlin's staff. The black-haired youth's eyes turned red and he reached for the relic with a smile, thinking that although most of the raid group was hostage, they would be able to restore their authority by bringing back good loot. Youngwon's fingers almost touched the staff. Suddenly, he pulled his hand back and closed his eyes, screaming in pain. A bright red mark appeared on his palm. Jin-hyuk, who stood with his back to the young man, thought that this was a curse that lay on Merlin's staff. He looked to the side and thought that if Alice completely disappeared, then this relic would become safe, but Alice was now trapped in the ring. Youngwon raised his hands, asking what was happening to him. Teresa put her hand to her mouth, looking at the young man in shock. Jin-hyuk put his hand on her shoulder and turned her around while the black-haired boy screamed loudly. It was night. A tall dark tower was visible. Someone asked the head of the department whether they were standing at the entrance to the tower in vain. Yi-hyun, with a tired look, said that she was not sure that the guy's words could be trusted. The man opened a pack of cigarettes and replied that he just needed to wait a little. Ti-chun raised the cigarette to his mouth and added that they received the message, so they should at least get something. The blue-haired girl frowned and said that the experts had reported that the raid would last at least 3 weeks. The man looked down, remembering Jin-hyuk and his words and the imminent completion of the capture of the ruins. He was worried that the main character was not a member of the party. Ti-chun flicked his lighter. The system reported that the ruins called the Abode of the Fallen had been cleared. The man opened his mouth in shock and dropped his cigarette. A crowd of people emerged from a bright blue portal. The black-haired boy and girl next to him looked tired. People raised microphones and cameras, congratulating them for clearing the ruins and asking what strategy they used. Opposite the bald man stood a crowd in which many flashes were visible. The guild members covered the face of Jeonghyun, who had lost not only his hair, but also his eyelashes and eyebrows. The man in the suit opened his mouth in shock. Ti-chun and Yi-hyun stood in front of the crowd, asking what happened inside there. Teresa said with a wide smile that the ruins were not cleared by the Chongwon raid. People took pictures of the girl on their phones. Someone in blue pants and black sneakers took a step forward. Teresa looked at the main character and said that he managed it almost alone. Jin-hyuk's face was hidden behind a black mask, and the girl added that the others were just watching from the sidelines. Yi-hyun, with a bead of sweat appearing on her face, asked if she should call the association leader, and Ti-chun smiled, saying that was a good idea. The young man with bandages on his head clenched his teeth tightly. Then he turned around and walked away. People were moving away. White clouds swirled in the blue sky. A commentator with the nickname Truth asked who the man in the mask was. Water was pouring from the kettle into the plastic packaging. There were various news articles about how a strong player single-handedly cleared the ruins. Holding the chopsticks in his mouth, Jin-hyuk thought that people had written a lot of things. As he picked up the instant noodles, he thought that he knew this would get dark for discussion, but it was still too much. He was glad that his face was hidden behind the mask. While chewing his food, the main character remembered Teresa and thought that she had promised to keep everything a secret, so he didn't have to worry. There were chopsticks and instant noodles on the table. Jin-hyuk looked at the ring with a smile and thought it was time to talk to the locked vampire. The main character narrowed his eyes when Alice asked how he dared to put it in a dark and smelly pocket. The girl frowned angrily, asking if Jin-hyuk didn't know who she was. With a malicious smile, the main character shook the ring, and Alice asked what kind of earthquake it was. The main character began to wave his hand, and the vampire screamed that she was dizzy. Jin-hyuk looked at the ring with a smile and asked if Alice had come to her senses. The girl lay on her back, saying that vampires never forget an insult. The main character narrowed his eyes suspiciously, and Alice ordered him to stop. He waved his hand and said that she still hadn't realized anything, so he would have to explain. The girl opened her red eyes wide and screamed that she was going to throw up. With a crazy smile and burning eyes, Jin-hyuk began to rotate his hand in the air. Alice screamed loudly as her white hair flew around. A red light was visible. 3 hours later, the ring was on the table and Alice was begging it to stop. The main character raised his hand to the artifact, which began to emit a red glow, and ordered the vampire to leave. The system reported that Jin-hyuk was releasing the power from the Braham ring. Alice sat on the floor, resting her hands on it. She then smiled widely and said that it was finally time for revenge. Suddenly the vampire looked at Jin-hyuk, who was several times larger than her. She looked at herself in horror, asking what it was, and the main character explained that he had pulled out and materialized only a part of Alice. The girl looked at him in bewilderment, and he added that now she can still be called a mini version of Alice because she can use barely 1% of her powers. Jin-hyuk smiled and thought that she was still stronger than an ordinary vampire, even though he imposed a limitation. Alice fell to the floor and covered her face with her hands. The main character looked at her and informed her that what he said in the ruins was not a lie. The vampire, with tears streaming from her eyes, told him to shut up because she did not want such freedom. Jin-hyuk grinned and said that he would give Alice the true freedom she craves. The vampire opened her red eyes. She looked at the main character and asked what this meant. He crossed his arms and said that he would destroy everyone who betrayed Alice if she helped him and return her place as head of the Anorexia clan. The system reported that a new video was uploaded to the honor roll. Alice stood half-turned. Jinhyuk held his sword out in front of him as someone said that during a raid that was supposed to fail, a masked player turned the tables. Netizens wrote comments saying they were nervous while watching the video. Jinhyuk raised his burning hand. Commentators wrote that his actions did not look like a newcomer. There was an explosion. Someone wrote that the main character's magic and technique were at an incredible level. Jinhyuk's sword blade shone as did his eyes. Belso suggested that this is the same guy from the video about the tree. Other commentators wrote that everyone should recognize the main character. Jinhyuk stood with a lot of camera flashes around him, and another viewer wrote that he is the country's new hero. A user with the nickname All the Girls in the Country asked if all the guilds wanted to get the main character. These comments were visible on the screen. Jinhyuk raised his head and said that many guilds have absolutely no money. Standing in front of a tall building, he concluded that this seemed to be true. The main character looked at the mask in his hand with a grin and thought that he was not going to get involved in the affairs of the guilds or the showdowns between them. He didn't care about them. There was a huge explosion and Jinhyuk thought that they wanted to kill him. He kicked the fragment and decided that he was not going to forgive it. In front of the main character stood a huge crowd of men in black suits. He raised his hand, creating a fireball. When his palm became covered in fire, he thought he would tear them to shreds. On the top floor of the building, a man sat with his hand on his face. The young man rested his head on the floor, gritting his teeth, while Gongsu said that Jinhyuk should have died in these runes. The man slammed his fist on the table, shouting that his subordinate had woken up the guards and had achieved nothing in the end. Gongsu frowned and shouted loudly that because of some fool they couldn't handle, their guild would lose its reputation and might cease to exist altogether. The head of the Black Crow Guild kicked Hajin, who let out a painful sigh. Two guards in black glasses and suits stood at the white door. From the fiery explosion, Hajin flew into the air. A man in black sneakers entered the room. The main character clenched his hand into a fist, asking Gongsu if he was the master of this guild. Gongsu grabbed the arm of the chair and ordered his subordinate to grab Jinhyuk. Hajin sat down on the floor, thinking that this was his only opportunity to restore honor in the face of the head. Then he jumped up, thinking that he would be called Super Hands again. Suddenly, the main character removed the mask from his face and greeted the man with a smile. He then punched Hajin in the face. He flew into the wall. Gongsu put his hand forward and shouted that because of Jinhyuk they lost positions in the association. He asked if the main character thought that he could just walk around here. Jinhyuk sat down in the chair and said that this is not what Gongsu should worry about. The man frowned. His hand reached for the sword, which lay on the stand. The system reported that Gongsu was activating a level 5 flash sword. He jumped onto the table, stretching his arms out to the sides and looking at Jinhyuk. Gongsu frowned in confusion, thinking about the main character being so relaxed even though a sharp sword would pierce him right away. He brought the blade to Jinhyuk's head, deciding that he should die. The man opened his mouth in shock when something hit his sword. He frowned and broke out in sweat, looking at the fragment of the sword, and realized that it was a saber. The main character grinned contentedly. He reached into the bag of checkers and said that they were convenient to throw. Jinhyuk put his feet on the table. With a smile, he invited Gons to start a conversation. A huge level 25 scarab suddenly jumped out at them. Alice screamed in horror that the monster was very nasty. "Alice, stand behind me," the main character said, waving his hand. A moment later, Jinhyuk was surrounded by a crowd of scarabs. Without thinking twice, he extended his hand forward. It was reported that the unique ability Heaven's Favor was activated. A giant flash illuminated everything around. Suddenly there was a deafening explosion. A very bright light came down from the ceiling to the ground. It illuminated every monster around the main character. The monster's physical defense decreased by 30%. Immediately, Jinhyuk turned to Alice, who was hovering next to him, and told her to show her strength. The angry girl raised her fist and asked why a noble vampire should fight such nasty monsters. A crazy smile appeared on the main character's face at that very second. He began to twirl his finger, around which magic began to accumulate. What, he asked, looking at the vampire, who was very scared. At that same second, she put her hands in front of her, in front of which a magic circle immediately appeared and strong magic was released. It was reported that Alice was activating bloodbinds of an unknown level. Blood began to envelop the scarabs. By completely enveloping the scarabs, they created huge drops of blood containing the monsters. "Great," said the main character, smiling and preparing to attack. It has been reported that the power surge stat is applied. 100 stats, the difference is reduced by 33 levels. In 1 second, Jinhyuk cut through all the huge drops of blood, destroying all the monsters. Notifications immediately started pouring in that the main character had raised his level by several points. Stopping, he lowered the blade, which was covered in the black blood of monsters, and said that it was very difficult for him to hold back, adding that while he remained at the first level, he had accumulated so much stress. At the same second, a new crowd of scarab monsters surrounded Jinhyuk. The unique ability Sword Graveyard is activated. The main character stood up again. A powerful and terrifying aura appeared around him. He smiled madly, and incredible power oozed from his eyes. He shouted that he was very happy about the appearance of monsters. Clear day. The sun illuminated everything around. Olympus Guild. There were members of the guild in the meeting room. Folding his hand, the head of the Titan Guild, exhaling heavily, said that it seems that almost everyone is assembled, so it's time to start. Looking at everyone present, Frederick said that everyone already knew that the 8th raid on the 4th floor ended in failure. He stretched his fingers first on one hand, then on the other, saying that out of 100 people, divided into 15 detachments, only 9 returned alive. He remembered the powerful boss of the 3rd floor, and then said that although the boss is very ordinary, he summons thousands of statues, so he needs a way to defeat them. Damn, one of those present hit the table with a loud scream. It was Tenwei, the head of the China Guild. Sticking his hand in front of him and gritting his teeth in anger, he said that they could not cope even with the use of a divine artifact, after which he asked how Frederick would order to get rid of these statues. Immediately Maria, the head of the Olympus Guild, calmly replied that the 2nd and 3rd floors were completed too quickly and good players had too little time to level up. Teresa stood behind her. A dissatisfied Jinho sat next to her with his arms crossed over his chest. Maria continued to say if only there were more players above level 15. That's right, Jinho, the head of the 3rd squad of the Tengen Guild, immediately answered. Suddenly, with a frown, he decided to ask if it was because they were having problems because guilds like China were monopolizing dungeons for control of magic crystals. Tenwei immediately reacted with displeasure to this and indignantly asked if he was really challenging him. What did I say wrong? Jinho asked in response. At that very second they started shouting at each other. Their faces were several centimeters away. Tenwei shouted that they were just passing through the tower for the sake of humanity, adding that he would not tolerate insults. Do you think this excuse will help? Jinho shouted furiously. Frederick watched all this. When he got tired of this, he asked the guys to stop, adding that the only thing they were missing was civil strife. We have gathered to solve another problem, he said calmly, while those who had quarreled looked at him angrily. Jinho sank back into his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Maria, also holding her hands on her chest, asked if Frederick had any thoughts. Yesterday, he said, clutching his head, a message arrived from Maine. Having gathered his strength, he continued that if they fulfill one condition, then they will help them. Maria, Tenwei, and Jinho were shocked when they heard this. Drops of cold sweat appeared on their faces. There was silence in the meeting room for several seconds. Suddenly everyone started screaming, furiously asking whether to cooperate with them. After all, they are all on the international wanted list. They cannot work with such non-entities as Maine. Teresa, standing behind Maria, simply listened to all this without interfering. A bead of sweat ran down her cheek. She herself said in her head that everyone present is afraid to interact with Maine, adding that this is not surprising because the influence of the guilds is already higher than the influence of the government. At one point she calmed down and simply listened to the indignant screams of the heads. She continued to reflect that the greater the influence, the more important moral character becomes, adding that they must act with this in mind. The source of light in this room was a bright chandelier from above. Suddenly the aura in the hall changed to a more sinister one, and the light from the chandelier began to fade. Non-entities, a voice was heard. It's somehow unpleasant to hear this, the stranger said. All the light from the room was absorbed by the fireplace from which this voice came. Everyone looked in that direction in horror. Suddenly the fire in the fireplace flared up even more. He was unusual. The normal flames were mixed with black fire. Pride is a good thing, said the voice. At that same second, a man wearing a dark cape appeared in the hall, from behind which only his thick gray beard was visible. In his hands he had a staff, at the end of which there was a skull. He looked at those present, asking if they understood that they would not be able to cope only on their own. The terrifying aura emanating from the old man filled the entire room. All the heads immediately jumped up from their seats, backing away. Jinho was furious. He shouted how the damn Maine dared to come here. He was incredibly angry and pierced the table with his fingers. Grabbing it, Jinho swung it and ran at the old man, shouting that if he himself had come here, he would kill him. Jinho threw the table at Maine, but Tenwei suddenly appeared in front of him. He cut the table into two with his sword, after which he pointed the weapon at the old man and said that for the first time he agreed with Jinho. The old man did not move. He laughed and said, "These heads are just hotheads," adding that after hearing the proposal, they will change their minds. "Help us," he said in an intimidatingly harsh voice, after which he smiled madly, adding that they could cope with the boss of the third floor. Jinho was furious at this. He was ready to tear the old man apart. He could barely restrain himself, shouting that this was all nonsense, because if they united, they wouldn't even have 100 people. After which he asked how he could cope with a huge army. The old man, holding his hands on the staff, calmly answered that such a quantity could be created. At that same second, the old man was enveloped in incredible magical power. It has been reported that the skill Black Cemetery Guardian is used. Suddenly Frederick looked out the window and saw that something had started to happen on the street. At that same second, a skeleton hand appeared from the ground. A huge horde of the dead began to emerge from the ground. The old man said that this is all thanks to the wars that have died down long ago, because of this there are a lot of useful corpses here, adding that among the main there are many strong ones, for example, necromancers. Cold sweat ran down the face of Frederick, who saw all this. Necromancer, he spoke quietly and slowly, but summoned such a quantity. Hordes of the dead stood on the walls of the building. Frederick immediately turned his head and looked at the staff in the old man's hands and asked in shock if it was all because of this artifact. The old man was surprised and asked if the head really knew about him. Picking up the staff, the old man began to examine it, proudly announcing that it can only be created by collecting 99 items. "This is the Staff of Greed." Tenwei looked at the old man intensely, when suddenly, exhaling, he said quietly, "A combination of the Necromancer and the Staff of Greed. There is a chance to deal with the boss of the third floor," he humbly admitted, lowering his sword. At that same second, Maria shouted that Tenwei was even talking, because this was Mana. "We know," Jinho answered, standing 5 meters from the old man, adding that now the right decision would be to kill him right now. There was no more rage and anger on his face. He humbly said that if the public does not know about the agreement, then the game is worth the candle. "Even you, Jinho," Maria shouted furiously, to which he furiously asked if they had any other choice now. Teresa watched all this from the side. In her hand was a sword and shield. How did it all turn out this way, she asked herself. Everyone went crazy, she added in her head. She silently watched everything that was happening, not understanding anything. She imagined the image of the main character in her head, and then said to herself that if Jinhyuk had been here, then nothing like this would have happened. "What should I do?" she asked herself, abandoning her imagination. She continued to hear how the heads argued among themselves and could not come to a common decision. Suddenly a notification appeared informing that there was a request for a video call from the outside. Seeing the notification in front of her, Teresa was very surprised. The system window asked whether to accept the request from Jinhyuk. Teresa answered the call immediately. "Jinhyuk?" the girl shouted joyfully when she saw the main character appear on the screen, asking the girl how she was doing. When suddenly he heard screams in the hall. "What is this strange situation?" he asked, seeing nothing. Suddenly the old man heard the voice of the main character. Turning his head sharply towards the girl, he asked her who he was, adding that since he had given his voice, then let him show his face. "Switch to conference mode." "As you wish," said the main character. He disappeared in Teresa's face. A huge screen appeared in the middle of the hall, with Jinhyuk's face hidden on it. Maria recognized him. Looking at the closed face of the main character, she screamed, was this really the unknown person who had cleared the first floor dungeon? Remembering his image, the image of a guy who possessed enormous power, Maria explained that this was an incredible player who cleared the dungeon alone, unknown to anyone, and large guilds from all over the world wanted to get this player. And now this super rookie is right in front of them. The heads of the guilds crowded around the screen. It was reported that they made such efforts to contact the main character. All the heads smiled madly and confusedly, and drops of sweat ran down their faces. That is why everyone concerned's mouth went dry with joy due to the unexpected appearance. "Interesting," the old man said, smiling madly, after which he added that he also heard about Jinhyuk, about the player who cleared the first floor dungeon. He stroked his beard with interest and asked if the main character knew that this time there would be a capture of the boss of an absoluteness of another level. Hearing this, Jinhyuk asked if it was possible for a necromancer to defeat the boss. Of course, the old man answered immediately. Outside the window was a terrifyingly huge army of the dead. The old man said that so many summoned people thought that it would be enough, after which he added that even the heads of the guilds agreed. "True," the main character asked sarcastically. "Are you sure you can handle this fake staff?" Jinhyuk suddenly asked with a mockery. Hearing this, Teresa was surprised, and the old man shouted in rage, "How dare he?" Then the main character said, "The heart of a saint and the prison uniform anointed with oil." It was without these two items that the old man created the staff. Listening to this, everyone gathered in the hall was shocked. Suddenly Frederick asked, looking at the closed face of the main character, if he had evidence. After thinking for a while, Jinhyuk replied by pointing to the staff, that the real Staff of Greed has a red stone under its skull, and the open floors do not have some of the materials needed to create a real staff. After that, he pointed to the summoned dead, who were missing an arm or leg somewhere. Jin-hyuk said that the dead were too weak and such soldiers could not even last a quarter of a day in the boss's room. I think that if there is danger, the old man will simply abandon you, running away with the loot like a typical swindler. After these words, all the guild heads were opposed to the old man. The necromancer himself did not know what to say. Suddenly, through clenched teeth, he said that the main character was impudent. At that same second, power enveloped the old man. He immediately waved his staff, dissolving and shouting at the end that they would still regret that they did not accept his offer, after which he added that they would not be as calm the next time they met. "I will keep an eye on you," he said finally. After these words, he disappeared, leaving behind only smoke, and the dead collapsed from loss of strength. The sun shone again, illuminating everything around. Seeing the scattered dead, Frederick was very scared. "What to do now?" he asked, without leaving the window. "Leave it to me," the main character immediately replied. All the heads glanced at the screen in which Jin-hyuk said that no one would have to cooperate with Manami because he was taking responsibility for the operation. Frederick approached the screen and asked in surprise if the main character really wanted to say that he could cope alone. "Yes, that's true," Jin-hyuk answered without a drop of doubt in his voice. Doubt and fear were visible in Frederick's face. In his head he said that even if the main character does not succeed, he will at least be closer to them. There was some excitement on Maria's face. Unlike the deal with Manami, this one has no serious disadvantages. Frederick continued talking to himself. Tenwei smiled contentedly, realizing that they had a good opportunity. Jinho had a crazy smile on his face. They all understood that such a good moment should not be missed. At that same second, putting his hand to his chest, Tenwei asked Jin-hyuk what kind of payment would suit him. He was immediately interrupted by Maria, who with a malicious smile on her face said that Olympus would fully finance the main character. Friedrich interrupted her, calmly saying that Titan would provide financial support. Behind him stood Jinho, who raised his fist and said that the main character may not want money, which is why he is ready to provide everything necessary. "I don't need anything," Jin-hyuk interrupted the guild leaders. He calmly added, in addition, that the heads would restrict the entry of other players so that he could go through alone. "I don't need a reward," he said firmly. Confused, Maria thoughtfully asked why Jin-hyuk needed all this. "This makes one doubtful," Tenwei added, looking at the screen with some disbelief, after which he asked what the reason was. "The reason," the main character said thoughtfully, scratching his cheek. After thinking, he replied that he was simply doing what was necessary, when he suddenly added that this was also for the sake of his dear colleague. Hearing this, Teresa blushed with embarrassment. Behind the screen, the main character pinched his leg to restrain himself. He didn't like so much senseless pathos. Teresa smiled warmly with a slight blush on her cheeks from Jin-hyuk's pleasant words. "I'm delighted," Jinho shouted loudly, causing smoke to come out of his mouth. The main character looked at Jinho's face, who said contentedly that as a representative of the guild, he had nothing to add because Jin-hyuk's words deeply touched him. "Good atmosphere," the main character said to himself. There was a camera next to him, which notified that a video was being recorded. All the heads moved away from the screen and began to discuss something. At this time, Teresa was left alone with the main character. In his head, Jin-hyuk said that ordinary players would ask for good payment, but here it is worth thinking about the prospects. Behind the mask, the main character had a crazy smile on his face. He said to himself that a player who sacrifices rewards for the sake of his comrades, after which he added that thanks to these words he could get much more than he would have been paid. He also understood that he could not conflict with the guilds, so he would upload a video, editing the moment with Main. Immediately after these thoughts, he ended the video call. Having opened his characteristics, the main character saw that his level was already 12. He was pleased with the results, so he had a satisfied smile on his face. Jin-hyuk said to himself that he had only been in the spawning ground for a day, and was already level 12, adding that everything was going even better than he expected. When suddenly he was called from behind. He immediately turned his head in the direction of the scream. Evil Alice shouted at him, saying that he couldn't leave everything to her. At this time, mountains of scarab corpses lay behind her. Then Jin-hyuk, turning to her, said that since she has the strength to argue, she will not die. "Do you really think this is the norm?" she shouted. When tears suddenly appeared in her eyes, Alice immediately began to wipe them away with a handkerchief, saying that they did not have equal cooperation, but slavery. Dissatisfied, Jin-hyuk put his hands on his hips and said that this was an unfounded accusation. A few seconds later, he opened a store in front of him and, choosing an order, said that he just wanted to buy the girl mana replenishment. "I'm sorry, but that's not enough," the vampire replied. "Not enough?" the main character asked in surprise, turning to the girl. Alice looked at the floor and said emotionlessly that this alone would not restore her strength, adding that if the mana ran out, how then would she help the main character? When suddenly she raised her head. There was a crazy smile on her face. Saliva was flowing from his mouth, and there was bloodlust in his eyes. She extended her hands towards Jin-hyuk, saying that she should restore her mana the traditional way. The frightened protagonist, waving his hand, told Alice to calm down. In a second she was next to Jin-hyuk's beckoning neck. Cold sweat appeared all over his face. There was a bite. "Yummy," shouted a joyful and happy Alice, wiping her mouth with a handkerchief. Jin-hyuk, holding his neck with displeasure, asked himself how much the vampire drank of his blood. Satisfied Alice behind him said that she had replenished her mana, and then asked him what they would do now. The main character again approached the screen with the store and said that first he needed to stock up. The main character's basket contained a strengthening pill, an incomprehensible cube, an ability counter, a sticky glue, a forest web, and a two-headed ogre's snot. Having purchased all this, a notification appeared thanking you for your purchase. Alice immediately flew up to the main character and said that he had bought some strange rubbish. Jin-hyuk immediately told her with a kind smile on his face that although it may seem so, even trash is sometimes useful. Alice, the main character, suddenly turned to his companion. They stood in front of a huge hole in the ground. Jin-hyuk said that from now on they will have a lot to do. Alice sat on his shoulder. The main character looked at the girl with a smile on his face and said that they must clear the minus floor in a day. "Hang in there," he added. After these words, he jumped headfirst into the hole. He flew down with a calm smile on his face, and Alice, holding on to Jin-hyuk's jacket, screamed that he didn't even know the depth. How could he even jump like that? "Do I know the depth?" the main character asked himself in his head. Opening his eyes, he looked at his approach to the ground and said that he had already jumped here more than 100 times, so he knew everything for sure. "Alice, now," Jin-hyuk said with a satisfied smile on his face and purposefulness in his eyes. Alice didn't understand at all what he was talking about. It was reported that reverse gravity of an unknown level was being activated. It was Alice's ability to soften her fall. The main character carefully stood on the ground, and Alice, falling on all fours, breathed heavily and said that Jin-hyuk was too reckless. Suddenly he felt something. At the same second, the 4th level fire element skill was activated. The main character lit a torch in the destroyed hall. "It's okay," he said. Huge worms with sharp teeth began to appear from everywhere. "We came to the right place," Jin-hyuk said. Huge beetles and cockroaches crawled out of all corners. Insects were descending from the sky. Looking at them, the main character said that such weak insects could not defeat him, and then asked if you could come out yourself. He asked this from a huge monster sitting on a throne in front of him in the form of a huge statue. "So you know about me?" Suddenly an ominous voice was heard. "Of course I know," Jin-hyuk answered with a satisfied smile on his face. The statue's eyes lit up, the monster's face distorted into a mad grin. It was the hound that roamed the desert, Anubis. The statue tilted its head towards the main character and said that Jin-hyuk was the first person to come down here, so he wanted to have fun first, but the main character brought his death closer. There was not an ounce of fear on Jin-hyuk's face. With his hands in his pockets, he said that he didn't come here to chat. "And you are ridiculous," said Anubis. Immediately after that, he laughed, asking if he really thought that the Magnificent he would personally fight Jin-hyuk. Alice immediately covered the body of her comrade with hers, saying that Anubis is very dangerous, so she will try to deal with him and let the main character himself leave. Jin-hyuk smiled contentedly. In his head he said that Alice seemed to care about him. "Don't worry and just watch," he said as he walked past her, heading towards Anubis. Confused and frightened, Alice stretched out her hands, asking him to moderate his ardor. Then Jin-hyuk told the girl that he would show which person she entered into an agreement with. He was heading towards a huge evil monster. "Interesting," Anubis replied, holding out his hand with a weapon. It has been reported that Anubis activates the personal ability Judgment of Anubis. He screamed loudly, and his staff in his hand was shrouded in strong magic. Anubis asked whether Jin-hyuk learned about him from this vampire or not. The first question has been asked. A girl from magic appeared behind the main character, in front of whom there were scales. Jin-hyuk said in his head that Anubis always uses this ability on the enemy, and when he answers all the boss's questions, the absolute judgment of Anubis's judgment is activated. A notice immediately appeared in which it was written that the copying conditions were such that it was necessary to destroy the embodiment of Anubis, the container of his consciousness, by driving him crazy. Having learned about the conditions, the main character said to himself that if he pisses off Anubis, he will receive the power thanks to which he will be able to ask questions, so there is no need to answer the questions precisely, a short answer is enough. After that, Jin-hyuk smiled and answered Anubis's first question, right? Otherwise how would he have known about this place? The subject answered the question. Of course, Anubis answered with a terrifying grin, after which he asked if he had come here for the hive. Second question asked. Of course, the main character answered, showing a hand sign, without thinking, adding that on the black market they would give a lot of money for him. The subject answered the question. A heart appeared above one of the magical scales. It slowly dropped onto the scales. "Then I'll ask the last question," Anubis said, after which he asked if the main character had come to his territory and thought that he could stay alive. After asking this question, he leaned over Jin-hyuk. The third question has been asked. Showing a dislike with his hand, the main character with a confident smile on his face said that if he couldn't win, all he could do was throw away all his things and die. The subject answered the question. At that same second, sharp stakes imbued with strong magic appeared around him. All conditions are met. The Court of Anubis is activated. A huge magical crocodile swallowed the main character and reduced all his stats by 50%. It was also reported that all abilities and skills are sealed for 1 minute. Then Anubis, raising his staff, summoned a huge mantis and with a crazy smile on his face said that he would now need to present it for sentencing. It was reported that Anubis chooses the representative. It was an unusual mantis. It was also imbued with strong magic, which is why its appearance changed. I present him to you, Anubis said solemnly. Alice looked at this in horror because she couldn't stand bugs. There was no emotion on the protagonist's face. A huge black mantis with enormous power appeared in front of them. His name was Zayant. He was many times larger than the main character. Anubis said that it would be Zayant who would pass judgment on him. How do you like my representative? Anubis asked Jinhyuk. The huge monster crackled and buzzed. Impressive, the main character answered, and at this time a weapon began to appear in his hand. A record player appeared in his hand, which he immediately put on the floor, saying that it would still be enough for him. It was a mini gramophone. It plays the selected music once and also cannot be turned off until the music ends. Anubis was confused. Looking at the gramophone, he asked the main character if this was human music, and then asked if he wanted to darken the mind of the representative. Reason, asked the main character, taking the blade in his hand and closing his eyes. Music, he said quietly. At that very second, Zayant ran towards Jinhyuk. She needs to give herself entirely, the main character added. After these words, he grabbed his head with one hand and raised the other with a wedge, preparing to dance. Immediately the sounds of cello playing were heard. Jinhyuk said that he found the perfect music through trial and error. The mantis struck sharply, but the main character easily dodged it, moving to the beat. He continued to say that it was a rhythm that fit perfectly with Zayant's attack patterns. Immediately the sounds of trumpet playing were heard. As always, following the rhythm, he spoke. He dodged every unpredictable attack from Zayant perfectly. He controlled this battle. In his head he said that escaping from an attack using music is not luck, it is an exact calculation. Seeing what the main character was doing, he was shocked that he even opened his mouth. Drops of sweat were already running down Jinhyuk's face. He was tired. When suddenly he said in his head, then about now. It was reported that 1 minute had passed, which meant that the main character could now use his skills. The time limit is up, Jinhyuk said. Immediately after this, he landed many hard and fast strikes on Zayant. The sword cemetery skill is activated. Blood sprayed from the mantis's head. A second later, green blood also sprayed from the mantis's paws. Anubis shouted in shock, asking if the protagonist really thought he could defeat his representative. He was very angry, which is why he said through clenched teeth that Zayant recovers in seconds, and if Jinhyuk spends all his strength, then the end will come. Yes, the main character answered the words of Anubis, after which he added that right now he cannot kill this praying mantis. After these words, he turned to the boss, raised his blade, and with a satisfied smile on his face said that he could make him no longer want to live. At that same second, the representative's paws began to be cut off one after another. The mantis screamed in pain, coughing up blood. Alice looked in surprise at what the main character was doing and said in her head that she knew, of course, that he was so strong, but not so much. Suddenly a crazy smile appeared on her face, and she said to herself that it was possible if it was him. She raised her head, her cheeks flushed and her eyes filled with hope. Then he will help me take revenge, she continued joyfully. The bloody mantis fell to the floor. His paws were scattered all over the hall. An enraged Anubis shouted at the main character to fight and not run away. The representative trembled exhaustedly. Proud warrior, chosen by God, representative. Jinhyuk walked towards the mantis, passing through the remains of it. He dispelled the blade in his hand. In his head, he said that the last stage is that it destroys his, the great warrior, faith in his own invincibility, humiliation and provocation. After that, he sat on the head of the dead mantis. At that same second, the mantis rose from the ground, completely restored. After that, he put his battle claw to his neck, and he cut off his own head. The representative of Anubis was defeated. Horror and fear enveloped Anubis. Did he commit suicide? The boss asked himself. The main character was informed that his level had increased. The mantis's head fell not far from Jinhyuk. A notification appeared stating that after studying the magical tome of the Duchy of Peltaris, you can learn ice magic. He put his finger on the ice card and said that this could only be seen on the middle floors of the tower. Madness took possession of him. He gained enormous strength and power. It was reported that he had obtained the level 1 ice creation skill. The first level ice creation skill was immediately used. The main character closed the ice book in his hands. Immediately, many pieces of ice appeared around him. Anubis was very angry. He said in full tension that he recognized that Jinhyuk was not an ordinary person, after which he asked if he really thought of winning him by betting this ice. "What are you talking about?" asked the main character, who was enveloped in strong and powerful magic, after which he continued that Anubis cannot even attack directly, because he himself is holed up on the 42nd floor. Suddenly Anubis humbly lowered his head and asked if Jinhyuk understood that he was incarnating before, then why was he challenging him? "Reason," said the main character slowly. "Well," cheerfully, throwing out his hands, he continued mockingly. "You say merrily, you say merrily," Anubis shouted furiously. Fury and enormous power enveloped the boss. "Am I really nothing more than some kind of entertainment for you?" he shouted furiously. "Disrespect, disrespect," Anubis did not calm down. At the same second, a huge hive of bees appeared. The hive skill is a huge beehive in which countless insects live. It was reported that Anubis was liberating the hive. "Kill this impudent man," Anubis furiously ordered the monsters. At that same second, all the monsters that were aimed at the main character were killed by ice balls. "An incredible amount," Jinhyuk said mockingly. He extended his hand forward, which became covered with strong ice magic. At that same second, the protagonist's hand caught fire. The monsters surrounded him, but he stood in position, preparing to attack and defend. It was reported that Jinhyuk combined the fire element and ice creation skills. With their hands clasped together, the merging of skills began. A few seconds later there was a strong glow. All the monsters were absorbed by a bright glow that covered absolutely the entire room. The merger was reported to be successful. The next notification said that the main character had received the AA level daylight skill. The monsters were ready to attack the main character, who was absorbed by a bright cold light. The system notified about the activation of the first level daylight skill. 6 rays of light appeared. The light became brighter. A powerful light stream attacked the insects. The wasps looked at the light anxiously. A dark blue hexagon with a white sun inside appeared. The system window said that the daylight skill allows you to compress and release magical power, has high power and limits the enemy's field of vision, which gives a great advantage in battle. The main character closed his eyes and held the object in his hands with all his might. Anubis pressed his paw to his muzzle and thought that he needed to change his battle tactics. He raised his hand. Purple smoke appeared above his paw. The system reported that Anubis was activating the chosen creature. A creature with a yellow shell and glowing eyes appeared. The system reported that a particularly strong individual had arisen in the hive. The insect's eyes were red. It flew forward rapidly. Jinhyuk stretched his hand forward. Crystals appeared next to his fingers. The system reported that he had used level 1 ice creation. His attack left holes in the insect's body. Anubis thought that it would be too easy. From the body of one wasp another appeared. The creatures chosen by the ancient Egyptian deity do not die, but multiply. 4 insects flew towards the main character. Surrounded by ice crystals, the guy raised his head and looked at the approaching wasps. Anubis thought that no matter how skilled the main character used, it would not matter. Jinhyuk squeezed a small object in his fingers, smiled and said that it had finally happened. The system reported that the enhancement pill increases the size of the object tenfold. The guy waved his hand. The white beam hit one of the wasps. The insect fell. The main character jumped up, hunting for others. The system reported that the effect of the pill would appear in 1 minute. The wasps fell to the ground. Jinhyuk jumped onto the back of one of the insects. He grabbed the insect's antennae. The main character wrapped his legs around the wasp's head and controlled it. Anubis opened his mouth, asked what they were doing and ordered them to kill the guy immediately. Jinhyuk rode a wasp as he flew towards the hive, thinking that their ability to multiply rather than die would drive any opponent to despair. There were many insects behind him. One of the wasps hit the other with its sting. The main character thought that in the terrible absurd conditions the enemy could not sensibly assess the situation. A blue cube appeared around a ball of insects. The system reported that an incomprehensible cube had been activated. In the system window there were the names of the items: ability counter, sticky glue, forest cobweb, snot of a 2-headed ogre. Jinhyuk put his palm in front of him. The system window began to glow. The system reported that 4 objects were combining, strengthening an incomprehensible cube. Glowing rays touched the surface of the cube. Flashes were heard. The main character stood on one knee, pressed his palm to the ground and thought that thanks to endless repetitions he could understand the tactics and then correctly assess the situation. Insects fought against the walls of the trap and flames appeared outside. Jinhyuk smiled and snapped his fingers. The system notified that the 5th level fire element had been activated. The main character flared up inside the cube. It was an unusual decision that the main character came to. The system window said that the enhancement pill was starting to take effect. The wasps began to grow, then there was an explosion. There were many system alerts that the enhancement pill had dropped out. There were a lot of pills at the bottom of the cube. The main character thought that in order to become an equal opponent for the boss with a huge army, the maximum number of these pills was needed. Many system windows appeared in front of Jinhyuk with a message that the level had increased. Looking at them, the guy thought that thanks to the endlessly multiplying monsters, he received not only a lot of experience points, but also valuable items. Anubis clenched his teeth, sweat running down his muzzle. He could not understand what was happening. The main character smiled broadly. Behind him was a blue cube and a web. Anubis realized that he had prepared the items for unification in advance, learned the features of the hive, and created a trap. The guy's eyes glowed. He put his hands in his pockets and looked up. The ancient Egyptian god realized that he had succumbed to his provocations. Anubis slammed his hand on the armrest. His face contorted with rage. He raised his hand and cursed. God clenched his fingers into a fist. The system reported that Anubis had destroyed the hive. The fragments scattered in different directions. The main character clenched his teeth and, looking at the fragments, said that he was just getting the hang of it. Anubis frowned in irritation and asked how the man dared treat him with disrespect. God leaned forward and began kicking the floor, repeating the word disrespect. Anubis pointed his staff at the guy and said that he must survive and rise to him. Jinhak smiled and said that there was no need to shout like that, because he himself planned to do so. God smiled bloodthirstily and said that she would punish him for his disrespect. His eyes went dark. The system reported that the Anubis container had been destroyed. The system window said that the conditions were met. The main character smiled, and a square with the inscription saved appeared behind him. In the system window there was information that to activate the Judgment Anubis skill, you need to ask 3 questions, after which the enemy's strength is reduced by 50% and all skills and abilities will be blocked for 1 minute. A purple hexagon appeared with an ancient Egyptian symbol inside. The system reported that the skill can be used on one person only once, and if abused, punishment from the Egyptian gods awaits. The main character presented a fresco on which there was a creature with a bird's head and a human body. The system reported that the gods of Egypt were showing interest in him. He also presented an image with green skin. The system reported that some gods were experiencing hostility. Jinhak squinted, sighed heavily, and said that the local gods are quite picky. Lord's eyes were widened in surprise and she asked what happened here. The main character stood with his back to her and said that Anubis was tired. The characteristics of the player Jinhak were written in the system window. The Lord sat on his shoulder, studying the information. The guy thought that for the first time he was able to rise to so many levels in this place. 3 system windows appeared with a message that strength, agility, and endurance had been increased. The main character thought that he would pump up all his skills since he did not know what awaited him in the future. His eyes widened in surprise when the request for a video call came through. The guy in the dark shirt looked at the main character with displeasure when he asked why Yusung was calling him. Jinhak raised his hand when Yusung began to ask about where he was and why this place was not familiar to him. The protagonist said that it was none of his business and repeated the question about the reason for the call. A bead of sweat ran down his face when the guy on the screen said he had a proposition for him. Yusung introduced several people and said that in 24 hours, a martial arts tournament would begin at the Awakened Association, to which players of rank AA and above, including himself, were invited. Sweat flowed down Jinhyuk's cheek. He looked at his interlocutor in bewilderment and said that the association decided to hold the tournament despite more important things, such as the boss of the 3rd floor. Yusung frowned and asked the protagonist to take part in the tournament so that they could fight. The protagonist asked why he should waste his precious time on such nonsense and mentally added that his decision might change if the guy had new skills that he could copy. Continuing to frown, the guy in the dark shirt said that Jinhyuk couldn't refuse. The main character looked interestedly at the screen in front of him. Yusung showed a black card with gold designs and said that he had a pass to the black market. Someone tapped a brown object on the stand. The blonde man said the item was sold. The auction host waved his hands. According to Yusung's explanation, the black market was not a place where players could buy something with coins. The knight crossed his arms and smiled. This was a secret market where invited participants could purchase items exclusively for real money.